Hello and welcome to my year 2023 astrology and horoscope forecast. Now what I'm going to do is give a collective overview, an idea of what we can all expect in this new and what can be a momentous year for us all. But then I will go on to give each of the 12 zodiac signs, from Aries through to Pisces, which you can relate to in terms of your sun or your ascendant. The choice is yours. Now we've got a lot of information to get through. So one of the things I want to do is to make it as relatable as possible. So I'm sharing on the screen now my manifesto. So first up, you can see that I'm going to explore the last two eclipses of 2022. And the second of these, the total lunar eclipse of the 8th of November, is particularly crucial to this new year because the eclipse influence is for 6 months. So we must factor it in to the energy that's flowing into this new 12-month period. The next thing I'm going to share with you is the chart wheel of the solar return for us all collectively. So this is a simple wheel where I'm locating the planets based on the zodiac, starting with Aries in house 1, with Pluto, the Sun and Venus will be in house 10, Saturn in Aquarius in 11, and Neptune in 12. So that's very relatable for us all. But the next thing I'm going to share is the event chart using Universal Central Time, which actually gives us an ascendant in the sign of Libra. And also critically, the midpoint between the Sun and the Moon is conjunct an incredibly important fixed star called Sadalachbia. And that's going to be very influential too. I'm then going to explore the interaction of those different positions in that chart, so we get an idea of the aspects that are going to impact the following 12 months and provide a backdrop of energy for us all. But also this year we have a lot of moving planets. Now this is of course normal with the inner planets, but these ingresses are particularly critical with Pluto briefly going into Aquarius. We also have Saturn going into the sign of Pisces. We have Jupiter moving into the sign of Taurus. And we have the North Node reversing into the sign of Aries. So that's all very, very important. I'm then going to share with you the points of opportunity, so where we can really make progress in a very galvanizing way, but also points of tension, and there are some big ones this year for sure, and that's where we need to be more conscious of how things are going to collectively perhaps develop somewhat of a headwind for us all. I'm then going to share with you the eclipses for 2023. Now, last year, if you remember, my forecast predicted the financial crash and the increase in raw costs of fuel and interest charges because we had the North Node reversing into the sign of Taurus on the 18th of January, the true North Node. But we also had that big build-up of energy between Mars, Uranus and the North Node towards the end of July, the start of August. And also we had 2 eclipses in Scorpio, which is longer term finances, and 2 in Taurus, everyday finance. Now this year the eclipses are a bit different. We do have 1 in Taurus, 1 in Scorpio, 1 in Aries, the sign of initiation, a solar eclipse, but we also have a solar eclipse in the sign of Libra, which is how we relate to one another. So I'm going to be sharing about those important eclipses. So it is a different feel this year for sure. And then I'm going to go through the moon phases. So the moon phases are critically important. The new moon when we set our intention, but I'm also going to flag up to you when we've got a couple of more challenging full moons. We've also got a couple of blue moons this year to share with you. That's exciting. And then I'm going to go through the retrogrades. Now, the critical retrograde for many people is Mercury. And Mercury starts this year in retrograde in the sign of Capricorn. Now, we're going to have 3 retrogrades this year that are completely in earth signs. The last retrograde of the year will be in the fire sign of Sagittarius. Cast your mind back to 2022. Yes, we had those air Mercury retrogrades, but they reversed back into earth, then back into air. If we go back to the year before, we had water and air. So this year, the Mercury retrogrades are much more focused on the practical reality of our situation, and that can be resources, making the most of them, being applied in a way which gives us tangible results. Now also Venus is going to go through a retrograde this year, and of course as the year starts, Mars is just still in its retrograde, which comes to a close on the 12th of January, and Uranus will end its first retrograde this year on the 22nd of January, but of course we'll go into retrograde later in the year. So I'll go through the retrogrades for you that are particularly influential. And last, but most certainly not least, I'm going to share with you those horoscope forecasts for each of the 12 zodiac signs from Aries through to Pisces. Now, if you are new to my channel, thank you so much for joining me. It would be an honor if you would click or tap on the bell notification symbol so you would subscribe. I've punched through the 100,000 mark last August 2022, and of course I'm keen to keep growing the channel after all the health issues I had in the previous 10 years or so, and it's been a joy to produce more material, more varied material, and get to know more people. If you've already subscribed, thank you very much for doing so. It's lovely to have you with me. I do try to answer all meaningful comments. Finally, if you would like to understand what year 2023 will hold for you personally, if you give me 3 pieces of birth data of time, date and place of birth, I will give you a roadmap that can guide you for the rest of your life, but also your year 2023 personal horoscope, but I'll give you the rest of 2022 free, plus 30% off for the package. Please see the link beneath this video. So let's first of all look at those last 2 eclipses of 2022, which are going to be so influential in the first 4 months of year 2023. Now we have a partial solar eclipse which occurs on the 25th of October in the sign of Scorpio, which is about longer term finance, investments, savings, pensions, can be to do with shared finance, but also crucially business. Now alongside the position of the partial solar eclipse is Venus. Now Venus can be the planet of money in its rulership of Taurus, but it's the planet of relating through its rulership of Libra. So I think what we're going to see is that those people who are fortunate enough to have some assets behind them, whether it's savings, perhaps equity in property, perhaps they're even going to have some stocks, they may try to support their loved ones. The Venus link, very much about the potential to give and be generous. They may support their loved ones in any immediate financial pressures that they're experiencing. But I have to be honest, I think it's the total lunar eclipse which is going to occur on the 8th of November that's going to be particularly influential as year 2022 comes to a close and we make our way through those first 4 months of 23. And the reason for that is the moon is in Taurus, which is opposite to the sun in the sign of Scorpio. So the position of the moon in Taurus in technical terms, it's exalted there. It's its second favourite position after being in the sign of Cancer. But having Uranus almost side by side with the position of the moon creates a degree of uncertainty, even instability. Uranus likes change. The sign of Taurus likes continuity. It resists change, so that creates tension. But also in a T-square between the position of the everyday money Taurus and the unpredictable Uranus, and opposite the longer term financial influence of the Sun in Scorpio, we have the restrictive energies of Saturn. And that's really, really critical, because Saturn, of course, is about boundaries, but it can be about restriction, and it's in the sign of the collective, so us all. So I feel that this total solar eclipse, which obviously in historical terms has enormous significance. If you think about it, if you're living close to the land or the sea many, many years ago, and this will be true for some people still, once the disk of the sun, which provides all life to us all, is hidden, that feels pretty scary. So the energy from that total lunar eclipse is going to be very impactful. We have the restriction of Saturn, the restlessness of Uranus. Of course, Saturn and Uranus have been in something of a standoff now for some time. If you recall, in 2021, they had 3 exact squares. And in 2022, between the 2nd of October and the 12th of October, they were within 1 minute of an exact square. Doesn't quite happen, but within 3 degrees, we still have a great deal of impact, in my humble opinion. So when this total lunar eclipse occurs, Uranus and Saturn are back in that abrasive, grating relationship. One likes stability, Saturn, and is counter risk. The other, Uranus, wants to try different things. And because Scorpio is very much about those longer financial trends, and the sign of Taurus is very much about everyday money. So it's about bills, it's about the cost of food. And Uranus there is creating huge amounts of uncertainty, but also we're seeing a lot of industrial disputes and people talking about their rights. And this is something that is not limited to any one particular country. It's something that's very, very powerful for us all. So I think as we come into 2023, the financial system is under an enormous amount of pressure. Now, there are a few other things to tell you about. For example, the United Kingdom was formed in 1801. In the progress chart, we have a collection of planets in the sign of Leo. So it means the transiting Saturn, which is going to move into Pisces in early March, is opposing all those planets in Leo. So a time of tension for the UK. China, the fastest expanding economy in the world over the last 30 or 40 years. Well, their property market works in a different way to how it does in the UK and the US. Very often deposits are made on property, and it can be as much as 75% of the value of the property. But what's happening there is unprecedented, where people are withdrawing their deposits, holding them back. That's individuals, and that's within a totalitarian system. And the shortfall in terms of the liquidity of the developers is something like $150 billion. So it's a huge problem. The government are looking to inject those kind of funds to try to provide that liquidity, but there are some property developers there that have been seeking refinancing because of this problem that they can't build the properties that they have taken some deposits on, and other people are holding them back or withdrawing them. Plus we've got capital outflows from China because investors globally are concerned that their less than fulsome attitude in terms of the Ukraine, in terms of the human rights issues there, and also their posturing on Taiwan. So people are wondering if they're going to invade Taiwan. Is it going to be a Ukraine Mark II? That's creating a lack of confidence. Their growth is virtually down to nil, about 0.4%. The UK's growth predicted to be absolutely flat, which technically is a recession. So we've got a lot of headwinds financially. And of course, because of the Ukraine crisis, the restriction of gas being pumped into Western Europe from Russia, and those are fixed contracts. So because it's all piped, it's all very much an infrastructure issue, whereas in terms of the oil that's produced by Russia, that's sold on the spot market, and so that has a little bit more flexibility in it. So we've got the cost of the wholesale prices of those raw commodities going up. So that's causing a huge impact on consumers right across Europe. So I think that this total lunar eclipse, as we end 2022 and go into 23, is something that's going to be extraordinarily powerful for us all. So that sets the scenes for the last two eclipses of 22 and how they impact on 23. But as we look at that 12 midnight on the 1st of January 2023, I just want to share with you on the screen the simple birth chart wheel, which shows where all the major planets are. Now, of course, in astrology, the first sign is Aries. So that's house 1. The first house cusp is Aries. And you can see that we have 4 planets, one of them technically known as the luminary. In astrology is the sun, of course, always in this position at this time of the year. But we have the retreating Mercury, retrograde, in the sign of business. So that's really influential. But we have Venus alongside Pluto. Now later on the 1st of January, Venus and Pluto are going to forge an exact conjunction, and that also is incredibly important. So what does the sign of Capricorn represent? Well, I think it represents, for those countries that have a royalist system, it represents the monarchy. It can represent state. So in terms of the United Kingdom, there's 4 different countries that make up the state. Or it could be to do with big corporations. It could be to do with old money, property matters for sure, the stock market, equities, very much to do with this Capricorn stability and ambition based on the material sphere. And it's really interesting that they're all collectively together like that, because this year, of course, is when Pluto makes its way forwards, even if briefly, into the sign of Aquarius and gives us a taste of what we can expect. But from January the 14th, 2024, it will move into Aquarius for a much longer sojourn. But that collective of energy there, let's think about Venus. When Venus and Pluto are together, we're almost always talking about desire, leverage through power. So, it could be that for some people, this could be a year where their careers will really flourish, and that set of influences will see the relationships they have with people in positions of influence really come back to them in a positive way. But I think for many of us, I think Venus is the message, how it's sometimes manipulated or distorted in some way that creates adherence to the power which comes through the planet Pluto. Obviously, Mercury retrograde suggests that we shouldn't necessarily take at face value the things that we're told, particularly by politicians, because very often the messaging is for a purpose that suits the need to retain power, not necessarily the need for personkind as a whole. Now, next up from Capricorn in house 11, we have Saturn, which House 11, Aquarius, very much about the collective. So we still have Saturn there until March when it moves into the sign of Pisces. And then in Pisces at 6 degrees and 43 minutes, we have the midpoint, the balance between the drive, the passion and the desire of the sun and the receptive, kind and caring and nurturing energies of the moon. And they're in Pisces for this year. So that Pisces energy can be about compassion. It can be about cool detachment. I do think there can be a duality to the sign of Pisces. But we also have Neptune in the sign of Pisces, the sign it governs. And you can see that Neptune's actually forging a really lovely link with Mercury. So that's suggesting to me that our communication always needs to remember to be mindful of the impact of our words on others, especially psychologically. Now we also have Jupiter, the planet of growth, the planet of fortune, the planet of, in traditional astrology, luck, in the sign of Aries. So that's really exciting. It's no longer in retrograde. It is going to move into Taurus later this year, which is also actually very exciting. But here it's asking us to initiate. We have Chiron in the sign of Aries. That's asking us to think about our identity, to try and get that stronger where we can. But just like that total lunar eclipse that we had on the 8th of November, as we go into this new year, the moon is back in the sign of Taurus. Now, it's not so close to the North Node and Uranus, which are together, but those three lots of energy from the sign of Taurus just remind us that stability is important to all of us. You know, where we live, how we live there, how we keep it warm, how we keep it cool. Do we have space, Uranus, or are there uncertain conditions in where we live? So I think there is quite a gap between Uranus and the moon, but it's one we should just be mindful of. Then Mars is continuing its very long 7 months and 6 days journey through the sign of Gemini. It's still in retrograde. It's going to go forwards on the 12th of January. And it's pretty close to the path of fortune. So I think that's pushing us all to get a bit fitter, a bit more agile, even fitter with our thinking in a way. You know, lazy communication, in my humble opinion, has become a big characteristic of the liberal West, where, you know, anyone can utter an opinion. Not all the time do people take a pause and just think about the implication of the message they're pumping out. And, you know, this can be really quite vicious for some people on social media who feel in some ways that they're persecuted or attacked through the medium of words. So we need to use the energy of Mars wisely in the sign of Gemini, but it can be about getting fitter, but it can also be about exercising our minds in a really positive way, particularly with the part of fortune there. And that's house 3. So that's very much about our relationship with neighbours, siblings, our immediate environment, and also perhaps to do with technology. You know, our reliance on digital technology is absolutely total these days. So important to have some conversations face to face from time to time. And Mars is asking us to embrace those with enthusiasm. So that gives you a bit of a flavour of what we can expect from the overall chart for us all. But now I'm showing on the wheel the event chart based on Universal Central Time collectively for us all, which shows the ascendant at 7 degrees and 19 minutes in Libra. Now, Libra energy can be diplomatic. It can be very much to do with our relationships. And you can see, ironically, that Chiron in this proper natal chart is right on the 7th house cusp. You know, there's only a few degrees difference, 3 or 4 degrees. So Chiron in the 7th house is saying we need to collectively heal our relationships this year, work hard on our listening. But let's just go back to that pack of planets in the sign of Capricorn, because this solar return chart for midnight on the 1st of January gives us some enormous clues, because the Sun, the luminary, the retreating Mercury in its retrograde, Venus and Pluto are all in house 4. So to put this into perspective, although Capricorn energy is very much about, the state, maybe monarchy, maybe government, maybe law and order in terms of how it's enforced through rules, and it can be about big institutions, corporations, old money. When we put all those guys in the 4th house, that's very Cancerian. So that's very much about property, but it's also about home, it's also about emotion, and it's also about our families. So those are going to be critical issues this year, for the whole year. And because Mercury is in a retrograde in the 4th house, Mercury doesn't like being in the 4th house. It's not very keen on being in the sign of Cancer. Cancer is a water sign, very much to do with emotion, governed by the moon, of course, whereas the sign of Capricorn is where the moon is at its least effective. And so Mercury in retrograde in the 4th house could see us tempted to bottle up our feelings. And it's really important we don't do that. So that link between Mercury and Neptune that I mentioned before on the simplified wheel is very important, because Neptune, you can see, is in house 6, which is very Virgoan. It's very much about physical health and organisation. But Neptune here can be about healing ourselves. And of course, Neptune in Pisces is wonderful for spa days, massages, aromatherapy. That helps the physical state, but also the emotional state too. So our communication with Mercury retrograde needs to be very careful and thoughtful, but particularly with people we're very close to, or about property issues. Now you can see that Saturn is in house 5. Saturn in house 5 is not a lot of fun. So if we're hoping to have joyful interaction this year, we may be a little bit disappointed, because although the midpoint is in the 5th house, which is smashing, we'll take that. Of course, Saturn can be about restriction, obstacles, where things are slowed down. And it is in a broad right angle with Uranus. So last year it was much closer on the solar return. This year, what is it? It's about 7 degrees. So it's still influential. We're still getting Saturn very much about the old way, even through its co-rulership of Aquarius. I think Aquarius is a sign that's actually quite misunderstood. A bit like Pisces is quite misunderstood. Cancer misunderstood. I must do a series on misunderstood zodiac signs. So the sign of Aquarius can be very much about embracing continuity, because it's a fixed sign. Saturn doesn't particularly like change, but with Uranus being the co-ruler in modern astrology, what we have is taking the best of the traditional and being very loyal to old friendships, old school friends, old organisations. That's very Saturn in Aquarius, but being very innovative and open-minded with fresh approaches. That comes through the planet of truth, Uranus, which of course rules the sky. So I think Saturn being in house 5 and Uranus being in house 8 is saying don't be too risky with resources. House 5 can be about speculation, and the 8th house can be about those longer term property situations. So it's not to say that if a good opportunity doesn't come up, you don't go for it, but just think about it very carefully. But of course, having the midpoint at in Pisces at 6 degrees 43 and being in an exact conjunction with the fixed star Sadalachbia is really positive. Now, this can bring success in ventures. The charm of Venus, and of course Venus and Mercury are in a conjunction as we start this year, despite Mercury's retrograde. Well, Venus and Mercury govern this fixed star. So there could be things that happen this year that give us a degree of surprise. We may discover hidden talents. We may discover approaches that we hadn't thought of before, because the sign of Pisces is mutable, it's very much about change and evolving. Of course, it's the 12th zodiac sign, so it can be an accumulation of all our knowledge and experiences. But in the 5th house, it is about self-expression. But I'm not sure it's going to be self-expression on a social plane so much, with Saturn being in the 5th house. I think it's more to do with our flair, our artistry, our craft, our talents. And this fixed star can really help us to captivate people with our ideas, providing we do things in a very thorough, step-by-step and systematic way that Saturn is asking us to do in the 5th house, and not invest money in a rash or ill thought through way that could come back to bite us on the astral bum. This is also known as the star of hidden things. So there is going to be some delightful things developing this year, but I think it's because we're going to be disengaging more from the material world and embracing more the spiritual world. Now you can see that Jupiter is in the sign of Aries, but it's also very close to the vernal point. So that is giving us a push to get back on the front foot. Jupiter went into Aries last year, then went into its retrograde, and within the 4-month retrograde, it rewound into Pisces. We've had an odd elliptic with Jupiter the last couple of years. Of course, it's gone through 4 signs, and it's going to be in 2 signs this year, but it will go back to its more regular pattern, and it's going to be in the sign of Taurus for just over a year. So that's exciting. So Jupiter in Aries is asking us to think how we can initiate, and that's really important, especially with that Aries solar eclipse which is going to be coming this year, which is asking us to get back into how we can recreate things based on our individuality. Now I've briefly looked at the planets in Uranus, but you can Taurus, but you can see they're in the 8th house, and because Uranus in the 8th house means instability in the financial system as a whole. Unfortunately, I think that is something we must expect in the early part of 2023 for sure. So that gives you a recap of what we can expect apart from Mars and the part of fortune, which are pretty close together, but they're in the 9th house. International travel. International travel has not been such an easy thing, has it, over the last few years because of COVID. I think this chart is kind of saying that we need to be thinking more about our immediate environment. We need to be thinking about ecological and environmental issues, because the 4th house is very much to do with water, river, seas, with Saturn moving into Pisces. The impact of our way of doing things over many, many years is really going to reach an absolute tipping point with Saturn moving through Pisces, if it hasn't already. So I think Mars being in the 9th house could see some people going off on longer journeys if COVID restrictions allow, because COVID's still going to be out there. But I feel that a lot of people are going to be much more aware of the need for their own emotional, personal security. So perhaps some journeying, but a much greater consciousness building up of the importance of emotional security, and finding a balance between that and enjoying some material things. Nothing wrong with that at all, but not being dominated by them in the way we have for so long. So that's a flavour of what we can expect this year. Let's have a look at the aspects within this solar return. Now I've told you about the Sun being in the 4th house, but it is T-squaring the ascendant, and it also T-squares the midheaven and the descendant. So that's an interesting one. So you can see down the bottom there, the Sun's just on that 4th house cusp, but it's in, it's basically forging or it's impacting on a grand cardinal cross in terms of the ascendant, descendant, IC, where the Sun is, and also the 10th house. So the Sun basically very, very important to us this year. What's the Sun going to be doing? We have a lot of sunspot activity, don't we? You know, it's been going on for years. Dr. Percy Seymour, British astrophysicist, was someone who wrote about sun flares a long time ago, did some very deep tombs based on understanding the science behind how astrology works. Our whole life force comes from the sun. So we're basically going to be thinking about new ways, perhaps, how we can become more conscious of the sun's impact in where it's getting hotter or drier, or the ice cap is being melted. But the sun is going to impact on how we relate, how we are as individuals in terms of our physical being, the first house, but also how we work. So I think home working could be here for a lot of people forever. Maybe it's going to be a hybrid system for many, a couple of days at work in the office, more time at home, but the sun is in that T-square. Now, we all also have the sun forging a trine with Uranus. It's a bit broader, it's at 5 degrees, so that means that innovation is going to continue to be a very important part of our life journey. Uranus may not particularly like being in Taurus, but Taurus is about the Earth, it is about territory. And that's why the last time Uranus went through the sign of Taurus, we did have the intensity of all the energy that built up with the Spanish Civil War, the Russian-Finnish War, and the Second World War with Uranus in Taurus. So the sun's angle to Uranus is asking us to innovate in how we live on planet Earth. So that's really important. We do have a semi-sextile, however, between Saturn and Neptune. That's interesting because Saturn's about the structure, Neptune's about how we feel things in perhaps a more sensory way. So collectively, I feel we need to embrace spirituality more. That can only be a good thing. Now, there is also a square between that Sun-Moon midpoint in Pisces and the position of Mars. So if we think of the midpoint as being the first house, that means that Mars is on the fourth house cusp of that midpoint. So we're really talking about turbulence around home. So I think the property market is going to be, very unsettled at the start of 2023. Now, there have been predictions of huge devaluations around property. I think it's going to be more subtle than that. I think properties will just stop selling at the inflated prices they have been at, and so the offers made will be at a more realistic level. So I would say the downturn in terms of the price of property is much more likely to be between maybe 10 or 15% rather than some of the more scary forecasts that some people have been making. So let's now explore those big movers in terms of the key planets. Let's start off with the first one, which is Saturn, and that moves on March the 7th into the sign of Pisces, where it's going to be for the next 2.5 years broadly. Now, of course, Pisces is the 12th zodiac sign, so it is the sign of karma. It's the collective energies that result from the journey that we all go through from the first through to the 12th house. And of course, Saturn itself can be a planet that's seen as being very karmic. It gives us a response based on past behaviour. So for some people, I feel that the next 2.5 years could be pushing them to be much more aware of the more psychological, intuitive and emotional spheres that maybe they have been reluctant to embrace. I think sadly we are going to see even greater pressure on big institutions like hospitals, psychiatric units that require more funding, and of course the structural energies of Saturn can actually do some very positive things here, providing there's an awareness of the need, because I think many people watching this video will have a very good connection between their more intuitive and emotional and spiritual dimensions and their more practical needs, and that gives us all an interest in astrology. But for those people who have tended to see things in perhaps a more two-dimensional way, Saturn moving into Pisces can be quite a wake-up call. The need to be much more inclusive to those people who may endure depression or loneliness or isolation. And unfortunately, some people may experience those very things with Saturn moving through this part of our global horoscope, if you like. But it's also true, of course, that the sign of Pisces, which is traditionally governed by Jupiter, which is pushing us to embrace a higher spiritual truth, and Neptune, which is more ephemeral and much more to do with what we can't see but what we can feel, is very much to do with oceans, the two fishes being the glyph of the sign of Pisces. So what we can have here is awakening, a greater awakening to the damage that's been done to the oceans, to rivers, to lakes, to water tables, through pollutants, through chemicals, through microfibers, through plastics, through our absolute obsession with consumerism, which Saturn in some ways encourages. I mean, its rulership of the sign of Saturn is actually probably a little bit more thrifty, but it's certainly its co-rulership of Aquarius perhaps is more to do with appreciating the connection between our relationships and enjoying some good things in life. And I think in the sign of Pisces, we need to start to bring in the technologies or the funding or the greater action, even if it does require a lot of research and steadfast projects, to try to find ways that we can push back against this rabid destruction of a lot of the planet's resources. And so where we don't do that, we're really reaching a critical point. So Saturn can be the payback time for our collective attitude to, using water copiously through showers, when perhaps we could have a quicker one, or perhaps if we're using a lot of plastics in terms of water, try to minimize that somewhat. Plastics around containers of all kinds, because this is the accumulative debris that ends up in house 12 that impacts on us all. So, Saturn, of course, can be quite a cold influence, and the sign of Pisces, I think, has a duality. The compassion of Neptune is admirable, but Pisces can also be very detached and cold too. I've used this simile before of the trout in the bottom of the river looking up at the angler trying to catch the fish, but the fish is quite shrewd. So there is a duality. There is compassion and giving to a tremendous degree, great sacrifice to those who are less fortunate, but also can be great detachment and coolness when the emotional sphere is not working quite as well. So I think Saturn's going to potentially teach us all a lot of lessons over the next 2.5 years. And even if we are people that have embraced with personal development or a meditation or alternative healing or doing things in a more gentle, caring and holistic way, I think Saturn can still teach us more. And, in some ways it could be painful lessons. In other ways, it can be very constructive lessons. Now, Saturn, of course, will go into a retrograde. That's going to be, by the time it gets to 7 degrees, on the 17th of June, and it reverts right back to 0 degrees, where it gets to on November the 4th, before going forwards again. But it is staying in Pisces from the 7th of March for the rest of the year. So next up is the tiny but mighty Pluto. Now, you may have heard some astrophysicists claim that Pluto is not a planet, but there are plenty of other astrophysicists who say it is. But in astrology, it's more to do with the effect rather than what the orb itself is named or its category. from an astrophysics viewpoint. So Pluto takes about 495 years to go around its entire cycle. So the last time it was in Aquarius, which it moves to this year on March the 23rd, was in 1798. We just experienced the Industrial Revolution. The Constitution of America had been formulated. So we're talking about huge social change, and that's what we can expect in the years to come. But the clue for this year is that because it goes into a retrograde by the 1st of May, it then retreats back into the sign of Capricorn on the 11th of June, and it won't re-enter Aquarius until the 21st of January 2024. And that's the point that I believe the age of Aquarius formally begins. So we're getting a taste of this year. So what can we expect? Well, let's just go back to that first setup that we have for this whole year with Pluto alongside Venus. So Pluto and Venus in Capricorn is very much to do with powerful relationships. But Pluto moving into Aquarius, those powerful relationships, very much to do with those big institutions, government, the royalty, corporations, the mighty control. So in the sign of the collective, even if it's just a brief sojourn this year, Pluto gives us even more of a taste of what we can expect. So what can we expect? Well, unfortunately, I don't think it's going to be a panacea. I do feel that there's going to be a shift away from the obsession with materialism. And I think there's going to be a greater awareness developing of the need that we have for each other. And that is an area that can be hugely regenerated because, Margaret Thatcher famously claimed that there was no such thing as society. But we have seen that causes tremendous problems when money becomes the only motive. Money, status, power in those ways is not very collective. It's not a socialist thing that I'm alluding to. It's a consciousness that we all are part of the same whole organism. And even if people are very successful, which they have every right to do, it's the way some of their money will be recycled and reused. So if we can all change some of our behaviour to be more inclusive, that's a really fine objective to have with Pluto in Aquarius' help, because this is the planet of regeneration, but it is also the planet of death. So the old ways can die out. Now, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth's sun is right at the start of the sign of Taurus. So this Pluto position squares her sun. So unfortunately, that's not a great aspect for someone's welfare, to be perfectly honest. And you can survive it, but sometimes people will have quite critical illnesses or difficult times. So, I think the Queen, if other parts of the monarchy have been brought into disrepute, and maybe in some ways her own reputation has been affected by some of the behaviour of other people within that family, the Queen has generally garnered quite a lot of respect, even if people are Republicans, because she's hard working and realises that it is about the collective. So her great project was working with those Commonwealth countries to build up mutual shared respect of those heritages that were there in the past. But of course, the more Aquarius energy would be questioning some of the rights and some of the ways that power was accumulated. So I think we are seeing, to be honest, the destruction of the royal family. It's going to really turn into something much smaller. It will be transduced in terms of its importance. Sadly, for some people, wonderfully for others. It's not my personal opinion. I'm just giving you an overarching opinion of one of the things that will happen with Pluto nibbling into Aquarius. Now, once it goes into Aquarius for the long term, in 2024, on my birthday, I should say, so it's going to be really important for me, big changes are coming. So some of them will be welcome, like encouraging us to perhaps not work quite as many hours and spend some of the other hours we have doing things that give us enjoyment and are more creative and perhaps more community orientated. So those can be really good things. We could have central payment from governments to citizens. I think that's entirely possible. Unfortunately, artificial intelligence and robotics are likely to become even more powerful, because one of the things with Aquarius energy is it can be a bit detached. So that can see an opportunity for these kind of industries and technologies to really grow in their speed and importance. Now, it depends on your viewpoint, of course, but for me, work is very important for us all. So if you make every lorry or every taxi driverless to reduce the cost to the owner of the company, that's not having a great impact on the social and spiritual and emotional core of the community. So for me, there are certain elements of Pluto moving into Aquarius which are not necessarily going to be good. But what we could see is the destruction of some of these old power bases that haven't necessarily been particularly healthy. You know, just running businesses for profit but not being conscious of the needs of consumers means that, you know, you can't talk to anyone on the telephone these days. It's all automated. Your call is important to us, which is why you've been on the phone for 20 minutes. And if you're quite good at dealing with technology, it's frustrating. But imagine what it's like if you're hard of hearing or find it difficult to see, or if you're someone who's quite frail or older and doesn't use technology. The disconnection to human voice and human reality is really not healthy. So those are the kind of Capricorn things that could start to make way with visionaries, with people who see the bigger picture, see how we can collaborate. And some technologies may come through that can push back some of those ecological problems, because they will be so clever, groundbreaking, because they'll be picking up on the energy of Uranus. So that can be a really good thing. But this year, very much a transitional year. We're seeing a breaking down of the old world order, and it's going to be interesting to see how things develop and evolve. But we need to bring humanity, personkind, to the center of our approach, not just purely profit. And that is the opportunity that Pluto in Aquarius does offer us. Now, on May the 16th, Jupiter makes its way into Taurus. Taurus, of course, is the sign of foundations. It's a fixed sign, it's an earth sign, it's ruled by Venus, and the moon is exalted there. So Jupiter moving into this sign can be good, I feel, and it's going to be in the sign of Taurus through till May the 25th, 2024. Now, if the Mars energy in Gemini at the start of this year encourages us to get more active and, you know, push ourselves to do exercises that are a bit more explosive and puff us out and give us more energy. I think Jupiter into Taurus can give us a passion for all the good things in life. So whether it's calorific goodies or whatever else, then we should be aware of Jupiter's impact in that sense. However, it does go retrograde from 4th of September through to the end of the year. So the impact on the financial system is going to be interesting here, because we are going to see Jupiter meet up with the North Node exactly on the 1st of June. And within 3 degrees, it will be from the 17th of May to the 16th of June. That's going to go across 2 zodiac signs, this, but I feel that this can see a bit of an uplift from some of the tensions that have occurred in terms of the financial system. Jupiter in Taurus can also encourage us to, use the sensibility of Taurus to use the more expansive energies of Jupiter in a wise way. Jupiter's wisdom comes through the sign of Pisces. Its expansion comes through the sign of Sagittarius. So the groundedness of Taurus means that Jupiter can do pretty well here on the whole. Now, a massive event this, the North Node, which is often obviously in retrograde. We're talking about a nominal point. And this is the collective energy, the collective consciousness that we're all feeling. Well, that leaves Taurus on the 12th of July and reverses into Aries, where it will be through to the 29th of January 2025. So that change is asking us to embrace individuality more. So that's really interesting, because its reversal through the sign of Taurus has brought a new consciousness about the worth of things. Everything seems to be becoming more costly, but in some ways more valuable. So I think the North Node moving into Aries is asking us to fall back on our own inner resources to recreate our reality in a fresh and new way. Now, Uranus starts this year at 15 degrees in the sign of Taurus, but it ends it at 19 degrees. Neptune starts the year at 22 degrees and ends it at 25 degrees. Now, the points of opportunity is definitely that Jupiter conjunction with the North Node. So I just mentioned this before. It's exact on the 1st of June, but within 3 degrees from the 17th of May to the 16th of June. So the combination of the two, some people would argue that the North Node can be like a mini Jupiterian influence. It's about opportunity. It can be about where we gain in life. But of course, it's also what we gain from our past deeds. So if we've gone about things through the South Node, our past, in the right kind of way, we can get our reward. So for some people, maybe it's going to be a more challenging outcome in terms of the North Node. Now, the points of tension, there are some big ones. April the 20th is the Sun in a square with Pluto, but of course the Sun moves quite quickly. But that's going to pick up on the Queen's birthday situation, that aspect. We've also got from May the 21st, Mars in an opposition to Pluto. That could be quite explosive in terms of the potential for warfare or very aggressive attitudes. Very assertive attitudes can come out across that particular date. I'm not going to share with you the other Sun influences because I don't want to give you too much data, and the Sun of course moves quite quickly, but from May the 9th to the end of August, the North Node, Pluto is T-squaring the two nodal positions, and it's exact on the 3rd of August. So I think that's going to be a real wake-up call for us all in terms of our past attitude, particularly to resources, and how we need to evolve our approach to embrace innovation, but also embrace the spirit of individuality, but in a way that uses the outcome of that individuality for the greater good. Now, we also have Jupiter in a square with Pluto. This can give people a rather dogmatic attitude in their natal horoscope, kind of right is might, especially about points of view, anything around religion and that kind of stuff. That's exact on the 18th of May, but it lasts for pretty well 1 month, from May the 3rd to the 4th of June. And we could see a lot of desire to perhaps misappropriate land through international actions, which Jupiter can influence. So just be conscious of that. Now, we do have the Sun forging quite an important opposition with Saturn in Pisces on August the 27th. So anything to do with health systems can come strongly into focus then. Mars is going to go through the third of its squares with Neptune. We had 2 in 2022, and that's going to be exact on March the 14th, but within 3 degrees, the 6th of March to the 22nd of March. If we're doing anything to do with deals or trying to put across our ideas, the potential for distortion is quite strong through that period of time. So let's have a look at the eclipses for this year. So the solar eclipse of the 20th and the 21st of April is at 29 degrees Aries. So that is going to be squaring Pluto. So the impact of that is going to last for 6 months. So that's really, really potent. The solar eclipse in the sign of Aries is very much about trying to get on the front foot, trying to perhaps live in the moment a bit more. It is about the initiation that I've spoken about. We have a desire really to do our own thing. So I think because of the more revolutionary energies, evolutionary energies of Pluto, we're perhaps going to see some real new energy come through in the 6 months from the 20th or 21st of April, depending on where you are in the world, which can have an impact on us all. So our collective energies are going to be really affected by that solar eclipse. The lunar eclipse, however, on the 5th or 6th of May, depending on where you are, is opposite Uranus. That's in Scorpio. So that's more aftershocks with the financial system. The solar eclipse of the 14th of October is opposite the North Node in Aries. Now I feel that that could be a real opportunity to use the individuality of Aries in a more collaborative and connective way in our way of interacting or cooperating with others. So I think that one could be quite helpful in some ways. And then we have a lunar eclipse on the 28th of October, which is actually sextile Saturn in the sign of Pisces, but that one is in Taurus, so the sun is in Scorpio. So you can see we still have some aftershocks from the total lunar eclipse which occurred at the end of 22, but I think because that particular lunar eclipse at the end of October links well with Saturn, we're going to start to see a settling down. Things are going to get more ordered. We're going to be able to make more sense of the way things are. Now, in terms of important lunations, January 6th, we've got a full moon which is trining up Uranus. So we already have the sun in a great link with Uranus at the start of the year. Mercury's also in the mix there, and it's retrograde. So it's kind of saying that maybe we need to revisit some things, use old skills in a fresh and bright way, old experiences. So that can be quite interesting. The Aquarius new moon on my birthday of January the 21st sees a conjunction on the same day between Venus and Saturn. So, you know, this is where, if people are saying about Pluto moving into Aquarius, is this new age developing this year? Well, there's Saturn trying to impose the old way. So even if we try to do things in the right way, there could be a degree of limitation. The Aries new moon of the 21st actually embraces the first cardinal quadrant, the spring equinox. So that's really exciting. So that gives us another opportunity to try and rethink the way we do things, try to be more imaginative in our approach. It's a kind of a beginning of a new beginning, if that makes sense. There is a second Aries new moon, which is on April the 20th, and this can be really lucky because it's conjunct Jupiter and it's also a blue moon. So we've got the second new moon in the sign of Aries, and that's April the 20th, so really exciting. Now, May the 19th, we have a new moon in Taurus, which is actually sextile Mars, which is by then moved into Cancer. So Mars in Cancer is not its best location, it's in full, but I think that, again, you know, Mars in Cancer can see us with a new reality in terms of our attitude to property. June the 18th however, does see the Gemini new moon square in Neptune. So that repeats that square between Mars in Gemini and Neptune that occurred on March the 14th. So that one's going to require some care. You know, this issue with the distortion of data, pardon me, the manipulation of truth, we are seeing people being held more to account for their public utterances, but the potential for distortion, lies, mistruths is still incredibly strong on that Gemini new moon. The Cancer new moon of July the 17th, however, forges a brilliant sextile with Uranus. And of course, the Cancer new moon is the most important new moon of the whole year as far as the moon's concerned. So I feel that that particular lunation, again, is pushing us to innovate, look at things in a fresh way. August the 1st does see an Aquarius full moon, but the Leo new moon, which is the most important new moon of the year in terms of the sun's journey, that's in a conjunction with Venus. So we've got a terrific supercharged energy there on August the 16th in terms of our creativity, our expression. Also lovely for socializing and potentially for relationships. So we are enjoying some really lovely stuff here. You know, the second Aries new moon conjunct Jupiter, and the Leo new moon is in a conjunction with Venus. So that is great for performance, it's great for demonstrating flair and artistry, wonderful. However, the Pisces full moon of the 31st of August sees the moon in a conjunction with Saturn. If we're still not embracing the new reality that Saturn's trying to teach us about mental health, then that is going to bring some real reality to bear in the following 2 weeks. The Virgo new moon of September the 15th, however, forges a great link with Uranus. So once again, Uranus is playing a starring role. The Libra new moon of the 14th of October is conjunct Mercury. So our ideas, our ability to speak and communicate in a way which is good for relationships. The Libra new moon is all about relationships. So we have Mercury in the mix to help that process. On November the 1st, the new moon in Scorpio, remember, the sign of longer term finance, is in a great trine with Saturn, the sign of stability. So that's very good for financial system beginning to settle down again after all the aftershocks at the end of 22 and the first half, I feel, of 23. Now, we do have a new moon in Sagittarius on December the 12th, which is conjunct Mars. So that can be a little bit volatile. That may be giving us a much greater desire to travel, to be honest. But the December full moon in the sign of Cancer also forges a sweet link to Jupiter. So you can see that we do have quite a lot of positive lunations there. We just have that Pisces full moon, which is conjunct Saturn, which is much more challenging. And on the Aquarius new moon, we also have Venus conjunct Saturn too. So there are some sober moments within the lunations, but also some real opportunities to change our world. And remember, Uranus is the planet of truth, the co-ruler of Aquarius, the ruler of the sky in myth, and it's asking us to, you know, get to grips with the impact our behaviour has had on the planet, but also finding new solutions. Now, I mentioned to you in the intro about Mercury retrograde going through Earth signs all year, apart from the last one, which will be in Sagittarius. Venus does go into a retrograde for a longer time this year, for 6 weeks, from July the 23rd through to September the 4th. So that's going to be interesting in terms of our need to be individualistic. Maybe we're going to see a new approach to fashion, a new approach to how we relate to one another. The big, grand and proud energies of Leo needs to meet the more reflective energy of the retrograde. So going to be some interesting times, I feel, for relationships in general. We'll see a lot in the news during that period. Now, in terms of Uranus's retrograde, the first one ends on the 22nd of January and the second one starts on the 29th of August. So I hope I've given you a pretty exhaustive overview of what we can expect from this year. It's a year when we do need to accept that globally there's huge changes going on in terms of how we connect to one another, and we get the first taste of that through Pluto. We get the Saturn energy, which is very much being aware of the impact of mental health on all our lives. We all have mental health. We have optimum mental health some days, other days we may be thoroughly fed up, but for some people this is a much more serious side effect of the way society has been, where the focus has been very much on profit rather than people. So Saturn moving into Pisces is going to be the outcome from all that behaviour. We do have the collective in the solar return in Capricorn, but it is going to have a big impact on where we live, how we live there, and the cost of property, and also the cost of raw resources because of the still concentrated energy in the sign of Taurus. But this is a year when we can innovate, when we can learn to make do on less in some situations, or where there needs to be a redistribution of profit to consumers, where there's been too much profit raked off in a way which is grossly unfair. We're also going to continue to see a degree of social unrest, I feel, in terms of the way that governments or organisations are working with individuals, because so much technology has got into the mix. The humanity or the person-kind response has been squeezed out, and there's going to be much more push to rejoin us together. That's going to be good. But I think Jupiter meeting with that North Node, and in the second half of this year, certainly before the retrograde begins, and those two better eclipses going across the sign of Scorpio and Taurus are going to see a settling down of the financial situation in the latter part of the year. But I think it is going to be a new reality, and the age of just very cheap finance, cheap credit, spending money freely, worrying about that tomorrow. There's going to be much more capital controls to limit how much borrowing can go on. So I think we're all going to be trying to cut our cloth in a much more appropriate way. Huge amount of agenda around ecology and the environment, quite rightly. And I think in terms of the situation in terms of land and land that's being grabbed, it is really going to be interesting to see how Jupiter will impact, because Uranus has seen the desire for acquisition that goes against people's rights of land. And obviously it's seen a lot of restlessness in terms of migration as well. But I think Jupiter, which can be very much about the rule of law and the higher principle, moving into the sign of Taurus, I would suggest that the war in Ukraine would be resolving itself, if not completely. More hopefully, there would be the chance of some kind of cessation gets much greater with Jupiter in the sign of Taurus, in my opinion. Now, please stay with me as I go through each of the 12 zodiac signs from Aries through till Pisces. So Aries, your year 2023 forecast puts a huge amount of emphasis on your sector of success, where communication is going to be critical. But being forward thinking in terms of your approach to your work is really going to be part of the equation, particularly where you can blend your skill set to really good relationships. So whether it's with colleagues, line managers, big bosses, or even people who work for you, the way you express yourself in those situations is going to be really important. Now, of course, Saturn, the planet of structure, has been in your sector of friendships over the last 2.5 years. And I think it's possible there has been, to put it bluntly, a little bit of a clear out. Those people who don't really tune into your situation in the way that you want, you may have drifted away from. But it's also possible that there are still some players in your circle of friends that you are still extending a degree of credit to. But once Saturn does move into the sign of Pisces on March the 7th, I think you begin a period of time over the following 2.5 years when it's going to be those people who really understand what makes you tick at a deeper level, who are going to bring the greatest reward to you in your closest interactions. So it's not just a case of, the people that you can be jolly with and get together with and have a bright night out, which is obviously lovely. It is going to be the people that have a more profound interest in the deeper part of your nature. That's going to be critical. Now, also, Saturn moving into the 12th house of your situation can also see you at times wanting to create a little bit of distance between you and others. And with Pluto moving, even if briefly, into your sector of friendship and the collective, this can be an area of change, but also renewal. So the type of friends that I think that you're going to be drawn to this year are going to be people perhaps with an interest in personal development, in things like astrology or tarot or the psychic realm, or anything to do with natural healing. Those areas can really take on a much greater appeal to you, even if you've got a pre-existing fascination with them already. In terms of the lunations, on March the 21st, you have a conjunction between the Sun and also the spring equinox. This really is going to give you a platform to move forwards in a very energized way. Now, of course, there is also the solar eclipse in your sign, which is going to occur on the 20th or 21st of April, depending on where you live. But that is in a conjunction with Jupiter, which can be very fortunate, but both are squaring the position of Pluto, which is just nibbled into the sign of Aquarius. So if you really want to go forwards in terms of your individual talents, your thrust to do so, your desire for success is going to be absolutely remarkable. You could really have some success over the next 6 months if you follow your own credo. The challenge is that with Saturn in your 12th house, you need to really have the maximum self-confidence in what you can achieve. You can't let self-doubt in any way interfere with your conviction that you're on the right track and that you can make a success of things. But in terms of your finances, obviously we're all facing the headwinds in that regard. And the lunar eclipse, which occurs on the 5th and 6th of May, is asking you to be aware that there could be some sudden costs, or you may need to be flexible or in some way repivot towards a different way of approaching things. But once Jupiter moves into Taurus on May the 16th, you have an opportunity for the following year to significantly improve your income. It may be a case with Jupiter that sometimes Jupiter can kid us into thinking that everything will be absolutely fantastic without an enormous amount of effort on our part. But you're going to have a fantastic opportunity on the 1st of June when the North Node meets with Jupiter, and that can be very, very helpful to you indeed. And of course, the North Node is going to be moving into your sign on the 12th of July, and that's just going to help you to gather more momentum and self-belief when it comes to following what you need to do as an individual. But that will need to be balanced about what other people expect from you, because that heavy amount of Capricorn energy at the start of the year is sort of saying to you really that if you want to really fit in and follow pre-existing structures, and you're good at working the politics in a business, getting on well with people, then for sure you could really make your way up the ladder of success. But if you're someone who's much more of an individualistic person or a born bohemian, you could push back in needing to work in those kind of big business situations, and you may want to do something that's much more gratifying at an emotional level. I think some Aries people could well start a business that is to do with natural medicine in some way or another, or if you have got pre-existing skills in tarot or as a psychic, that could become a much bigger part of your profile over the next couple of years. But it's also true to say, of course, that when the sun is in its more jagged angles with Pluto, for example, which happens on April the 20th, that is going to be a time when you may have to just juggle between what you really want as an individual and what's expected of you in a different way. Now, Mars is your ruler, so it's important we do talk about Mars. And on the 21st of May, it is in a direct opposition with Pluto. Now, Mars in Leo can give you a lot of lust to demonstrate the more romantic and desire-based side of your nature. Maybe there is going to be someone in your friendship circle who really captures your imagination and could make your pulse race all the quicker. But I also think that when the sun is square Pluto, when it's in Libra, that could be a time of a little bit of politics around certain relationships, and that's October the 21st. And also, you know, without doubt, from May the 9th through to the end of August, as the nodes south and north pivot in a T-square with Pluto, and that's exact on the 3rd of August, you could find yourself asking yourself some big questions about what you really want from life, and some politics inevitably could show themselves up. Now, Saturn is also obviously a very influential planet, and it is going to be squaring with the Sun on May the 28th. Around that time, I'd be very careful about what information you share with others. I wouldn't get involved too easily around, you know, talking about something that's a bit contentious. If someone tells you something in confidence, keep it very close to your chest. Towards the end of August, that could be the time of the year when your physical vitality really drops. So just make sure that you're looking after yourself, doing all the right things, eating and sleeping, getting enough hours of recovery from the demands of life. So I think that end of August situation is really quite important for you. Now, in terms of that fixed star that I mentioned at the start and the midpoint, which affects us all for this coming year, for you that is in the 12th house. So don't underestimate your ability to discover yet more about what makes you tick or about what makes others tick as well. If you are planning a holiday, just be aware that towards the end of the year, with Mercury in a retrograde in Sagittarius, that could be a time when things could be snaggy, or if you're talking about a contract at that time, that also can be an issue for you. Now, the solar eclipse on the 14th of October broadly can be super for your relationships in the last few months of the year. So if you are single and wanting to bring someone into your world, I think that's going to be a pivotal time for you. But we're back on the financial picture when we're talking about the lunar eclipse of the 28th of October. But that actually forges a very securing angle to Saturn. So if you're careful with your resources and use Saturn's energy to listen to what you really need psychologically rather than what you need materially, I feel that the latter part of this year with Jupiter's help can see you really in a much better place from a financial viewpoint. So a lot of exciting developments for you this year, Aries, that is for sure. So Taurus, your year 2023 forecast is going to push you to expand your horizons. because of the cluster of energy in the sign of Capricorn, and one of them is your ruler Venus, but it's next to the planet of transformation, Pluto. So whether it's through physical travel or knowledge or changing your world so it has greater variety and stimulation, it just seems to me that that is a big possibility, a big trend for you this year. And of course, Mercury is the planet of communication, and it also governs things like travel, and it's in your 9th house as well. So although it's retrograde, this could see you thinking about your qualifications, for example, asking yourself whether you could add to them, whether it's in a professional context or more to do with a hobby. You know, for example, a degree that you've always wanted to take, perhaps it's in psychology, and Mercury retrograde can help you to rethink your knowledge base and how you could improve the amount of information and insights that you have. But of course, Mercury in the 9th house could point towards frustrations around travel, or even frustrations around some kind of legally based situation. Now, with Venus and Pluto together, Pluto, to be honest, can be the planet of death. So if there is a situation that you're wanting to free yourself from, because the 9th house very much about freedom, then I think it's interesting that Venus is there, because maybe there's a desire to free yourself from a relationship which is no longer working. But if you do need to have professional advice, I think it's possible that you may have to really be very attentive towards what you get and making sure that the flow of information is coming through as timely as you would like because of that Mercury retrograde. Now, of course, we also have that midpoint in the sign of Pisces, which is very much to do with friendships, but that's where Saturn relocates to. So there could be some opportunities to meet new people, particularly people who are rather different. You have a reputation of being a very solid citizen, which is a great gift. Your fixed quality is something that helps you to persevere when other people may give up. But of course, there may be some situations that do need to be shook up, and maybe it is around your friendships and associations. I think you're going to be looking or craving for new stimulation, and because of that midpoint in your 11th house, you're thinking very much about your future, but you're also thinking about your highest values. But because Saturn parks up from the 7th of March in your 11th house as well, I think it's possible that some people who in the past may have been big players in your situation may not be so quite as much in your future. I just think that's one of the transitions that can happen this year. Now, of course, in terms of Pluto, Pluto climbs right to the top of your situation, the 10th house cusp, and that can trigger a desire for change in terms of your work or professional responsibilities, but also it may see you want to take on more challenging roles that are more stimulating. Mental stimulation is going to be a big thing for you this year, but also stimulation around your relationships. Anything which is rather staid and entirely predictable in its patterns is something that I feel that you could become more disheartened by. Now, of course, the North Node starts this year, the true North Node, in your sign, but it's going to be making way and reversing into your 12th house from the 12th of July. So that's really a very psychological dimension, and because Pluto will be at that point in your sector of highest truth, on just the cusp of the end of your 9th house, nibbling into the 10th house, because it is going to have an impact across two zodiac signs, both the North Node and Pluto. I think it's possible that some real home truths might come home to roost, and that's something that if you can be open to it and prepared for it, I think that's very, very going to be very helpful to you. Now, on May the 19th, the new moon in your sign forges a terrific link with Mars. Now Mars starts this year giving you a lot of thrust around your desires, but also around your finances. Now the second house can be where we add a little bit of weight. Just be conscious of that. I'm not saying that would happen to you personally, but once Mars makes way into the sign of Cancer, and it's in this tremendously motivated link with the new moon in your sign, the new moon's an opportunity for you to launch yourself as an individual. So that's really exciting, a big opportunity for you to demonstrate to people where you can be most dynamic and really get on the front foot. But of course the lunar eclipse, which occurs on the 5th or 6th of May, depending on where you live, that's in your opposite sign. The moon's in your opposite sign, but is seeing the moon in opposition with the sun in conjunction with Uranus. So there could be some sudden energy, perhaps a bit of a clash if you feel that someone's really restricting your ability to be a free spirit. And that could be something that you may want to relaunch yourself around once the new moon comes along in your sign on the 19th. Now, important to say, of course, about relationships. And relationships for you are given a massive boost by the Scorpio new moon, which is on November the 1st. And that's forging a lovely angle to Saturn. So that brings a bit more stability to your relationships, I feel. But of course, a lot of people, quite rightly, a lot of astrologers will focus on Jupiter entering your sign on May the 16th. And it is a big deal. You know, Jupiter has worked its way through your 12th house, your 11th house and your 10th house over the last couple of years. So moving into your own sign gives you the chance to really create an authentic version of yourself that is really compelling for you, because Jupiter, after all, is about get-go. It's about optimism. It's about being on the front foot. It's about your sense of belief. It's about really feeling that your individuality can be very persuasive and impactful. And if you do want to be more daring in your approach, Jupiter moving into your sign for a year, and also having Uranus, the planet of change, in your sign, angling so positively to the sun at the start of the year, really sets up some intriguing new possibilities. You've just got to deal with it in relation to the North Node rewinding into a more reflective area in the second half of this year. So that can be interesting for you for sure, but this is definitely going to be an interesting year for you, an interesting year of change for a sign that's pretty well counterintuitive to change, counterintuitively attracted to change. So with Jupiter combining with the North Node exactly on the 1st of June, I think that's going to be very, very interesting for you. And this is your chance to really shine as an individual, but I think those friendships are going to change. You're going to be much more focused on your future and much more independent in your approach for the whole of 2023. So Gemini, your year 2023 forecast begins with your ruler in retrograde, which it will be through the first 17 days of the year. And that could prove a little frustrating. But keep the faith, because the combination of Venus and Pluto in your sector of joint finances, business finance, anything to do where you're deeply invested and committed, could actually turn out to be quite fortunate for you this year. But Mercury, of course, is what really gives you that agility, that ability to think on your feet and be very swift in your responses, and it helps you to really flex to opportunities in a very rapid way. And opportunities is something we need to talk about, because the midpoint for this year is in your 10th house. very much to do with how you connect to the wider world. And it is next to that extremely fortunate fixed star. Now, you do have Neptune, the planet of dreams, also in your 10th house, and Saturn moves into this area on March the 7th. Now, it just so happens that on June the 18th, when you have your new moon, that is snagged by Neptune, unfortunately. So for the 4 weeks after that, however much you try to get on the front foot around your career situation, clarity could be at a premium. Also, Saturn moving into your 10th house suggests that extra responsibilities and obligations could be coming your way, or if your work is an area where you feel profoundly unfulfilled, that may be something that you really need to grapple seriously with over the next 2.5 years. If, for example, you do something that's very worthy, even perhaps very well paid, but you don't feel there's much soul connection to it, because Pisces is very much about the soul, then Saturn can alert you to the need to perhaps reskill and change. But of course, letting go of something that's solid and stable in order to do something that really connects with our heart can sometimes be an expensive and painful transition. I know. I did it when I became an astrologer. And also this year, of course, Pluto just nibbles into your 9th house. Now, it's possible that your philosophies and your ideas can reach a much bigger audience with that slight ingress into Aquarius, but I think it's because it links so powerfully with Jupiter and the North Node. That's the really fascinating thing. So in other words, your 12th solar house is still very much alive and vibrant this year, as it has been in recent years. Now, of course, last year was that really potent connection between the North Node, Mars and Uranus, which occurred at the end of July and the first day or so of August, depending on where you might live. And that may have been particularly difficult to deal with, because a lot of deep held energy and old wounds and perhaps angers may have come to the surface, and may have been an uncomfortable situation. You may not have felt 100% well at times. The great news, however, is that Jupiter moves into your 12th house, and Jupiter governs the sign which is the 12th of the zodiac, which of course is Pisces. So if you want to expand your spiritual knowledge or gain greater depth in your way of being, then Jupiter can be very expanding of your consciousness. You know, whatever spiritual or healing activity that really interests you, then Jupiter can definitely be a huge force for good. Now, in terms of those retrogrades, as I mentioned in the overview video, with the exception of the last one of the year, which governs the last half of December, and that impacts on your relationship chart, as we have Mercury retrograde in the fire sign of Sagittarius, where it is in detriment. That could be a tricky time for relationships, to be honest. But also, Mercury is going to be retrograde from April the 21st through to the middle of May. So that's something, because it's in Taurus at that time, that's your 12th house. That could be a time when you feel psychologically more fragile, when your anxieties or sensitivities or feeling of detachment from people can be aroused to some degree. However, from the 11th of June through to the 27th of June, Mercury is in your sign. So that's much more supportive for sure. That's when you can really get those ideas going. The creative juices are really going to be flowing. That can be very positive indeed. The 23rd of August to the 14th of September, however, does see Mercury retrograde in your home sector. So sensitive strands, emotional strands, anything to do with the family, contracts around perhaps moving in full, or perhaps getting people, contractors, to come in and do work on your home could all be a bit glitchy, but we must always remember with Mercury retrograde, it's a time to rejig, recalibrate, repair and renew. You know, it can definitely be tricky, but what we can do is make sure that we control the things that we have the ability to do. So that is through the precision of the sign of Virgo, which Mercury also rules. Your sign brings the dexterity and the quick wits. Now, as I said before, the last 2 weeks of the year could cause some issues around relationships because of the position of Mercury retrograde in your 7th house. So whether it is to do with the Christmas arrangements, if you are visiting someone, there could be some last minute changes on that front. I know that sounds slightly out there, but that is possible. Now, it's interesting with the Sagittarius new moon, which occurs on the 12th of December, because that is going to be conjunct Mars. So on one hand, you've got Mercury just about to slam on the brakes, but another part of you wants to be maximally assertive at that point. So that could, you know, create some potential contrasts in what you're trying to achieve. So you may at that point really want to assert your boundaries, but at the same time be on, you know, in much more in the mood to reach out to someone. But just because Mercury then almost a couple of days later goes into retrograde, you may not quite get the responses you want, that the new moon's making you very earnest to achieve. Now, of course, Venus is also retrograde this year, and Venus in the sign of Leo for 6 weeks, that's to do with the potential for deeper awareness of perhaps your belief systems around romance in terms of the 3rd house energy. Perhaps there could be some thoughts around relatives at this time, particularly siblings. Now, if you're fortunate enough to have really good relationships with a sibling, then it's possible that it could get closer and more profound through that. On the other hand, it could be completely the converse. Then again, Venus retrograde in your 3rd house could see you reading quite a lot about different approaches to relationships. If you're someone who's been quite resistant to engaging with technology in terms of dating apps and so on, Venus retrograde could attract you to them. If you're someone who's been really hot on them, you may find that Venus retrograde puts you right off them because you want something more profound, more meaningful. Now, in terms of your friendship situation, even though you are going to have the North Node entering your 11th house on the 12th of July, which I think generally can be very, very good for you in the second half of this year. Of course, Jupiter is going to be in a much more profound placement in your situation. But the solar eclipse, which occurs in your sector of friendship, often important to Gemini folk, is really powerful because of its conjunction with Jupiter. So good fortune can come around your connections, but I wouldn't try too hard because of that square to that very late positioned early Pluto in Aquarius across a period of days, and the exact point of tension is actually going to be on the solar eclipse of the 20th or 21st. But because there is that new moon in Aries on the 20th of March, that, you know, really that combination with the first cardinal quarter really can supercharge you. So I think you're going to be thinking more about the depth of friendships this year, but new friendships can develop. But I think your spiritual dimension is really going to grow. But around work, I think it could be a big rethink or more success, but you're going to have to work very hard whichever transition or direction of travel that energy is flowing in. So Cancer, your year 2023, I think, gives you an awesome opportunity to reach big goals and achieve success. And in so doing, you can elevate your profile much higher than you may feel is possible. So it's absolutely vital that you do program your thinking with the belief that breakthroughs can really come to you, particularly if you've been toiling away towards a goal over many months or many years. And the reason for this is you start this year with Jupiter, the planet of rewards, the planet of expansion, the planet of opportunity, positioned in house 10. Very much about how you interact with the wider world, can be your links with influential people. And of course, the big focus with the solar return is that cluster of energy in house 7. It's all about relationships. And it is true that that's going to be critical to this year's push towards that potential success. With Mercury in retrograde at the start of the year, managing your communications as effectively as you can is definitely going to be important. But with Venus on Pluto at the start of this year, there is a kind of higher weight, a greater importance on all sorts of interactions. So every conversation you have can be loaded with opportunity if you seize the moment, because it's all about the impact you make in your interactions with others, the impression that you forge upon them, and that's going to help to build up the momentum. Now, there is some sensational stuff that's coming through in March, but I know that Saturn does move early in that month on the 7th into your sector of travel, higher education, and anything to do with contracts. So the following 2.5 years could be a terrific time to take a course, to learn to drive, to go to destinations that are on your bucket list but you didn't feel perhaps you were able for. All these things are possible, but of course Saturn can be a restraining and difficult influence. So whatever you're trying to do, it is going to be important to make sure that your philosophies are intact. You know what your motives are, and the way you handle any documentation or interactions with others is all scrutinized and managed with great care. But you are one of the great managers of the zodiac. But that brings us through to the 21st of March, because then we have Cardinal Quadrant 1. We have the start of the astrological year, and the following 13 weeks are particularly full of opportunity for you, because there's a new moon on this spring equinox in your sector of success. Then we have the second Aries lunation, which occurs on April the 20th, but that's merging with Jupiter just as Jupiter is preparing to move on and progress into the sign of Taurus, which is very much going to be about who you know and the collective. So those are two very important events, but just as they occur, Mars, the planet of passion, which is locked away in the first months of this year in your 12th house, and can stir up some debris to do with past situations, past upsets and hurts and angers. But once Mars moves into your sign, just as you have that spring equinox, Cardinal Quadrant 1, you have an enormous opportunity to really move into the moment and thrust forwards with a tremendous amount of conviction. So really, really important for you. Now on July the 12th, the North Node, which is like the collective consciousness, that also shifts into your sector of success. But then we have a very potent Cancer new moon on the 17th of July, which is angling brilliantly to Uranus, the planet of truth, but also the planet of innovation. And of course, at the start of this year, Uranus is forging a fine link with the Sun, And that's pushing you to stay open-minded, not just about your approach to situations, but also about other people. The truth of your relationships is definitely going to become much clearer this year. Yes, Venus and Pluto's combination puts more weight on your relationships, but Uranus is really asking you to see the big picture, to raise your thinking up to an even higher attunement, because that can really help you. Now, of course, there is a Cancer full moon on the 6th of January towards the start of this year, but that also is linking in very, very well with Uranus. It does, I should say, also forge a link in an opposition with that Mercury retrograde. So that's why it is going to be important around any documentation with Saturn moving into your 9th house, or contracts, and Mercury in your 7th house, to make sure that your interactions with others are as clean as possible. Of course, we can't control whether someone reads a message as we mean it, or sometimes technology will fail us. It can be unreliable. But as best you can, if your attention to the detail of communication, which is not just about expressing your idea, it's making sure that the comprehension of the other person understands where you're coming from as best as is possible. Sometimes we can explain things clearly and still the other person won't get it. So we can't have a total control over that, but what we can do is take the greatest amount of care. Now, of course, the other big mover this year is Jupiter, and Jupiter is about those opportunities. And as it moves into Taurus on May the 16th, that's lovely, you know, because yes, you have Uranus there, but that's been a rather restless influence. Of course, the end of last July and the start of August, Mars was also in this location along with the North Node. But Jupiter in the sign of Taurus, I think, is a really nice match. So if you do have friends who have a collective faith or a collective interest, perhaps it's to do with a passionate support of a sports team, maybe it is something that's more unifying, which is to do with some kind of belief system, because Jupiter, through its rulership of Pisces particularly, is very much to do with these things. But if you find yourself in the last 3 quarters of this year thinking of travelling, it wouldn't be a surprise if it was with one special friend or a group of people that you have that close bonhomie with. Just be aware, however, with Saturn, it is going to be important to work hard at the expansive elements of your life. Now, of course, Pluto is going to be moving this year too, but it is a relatively short transit, and in the time that it is in the sign of Aquarius, it's just going to start to weigh on you more in your subconscious in some ways, I think, about financial affairs, certainly joint financial affairs. Anything to do with property matters might be quite interesting for you, but you may develop an even greater interest in things like astrology during Pluto's transit through Aquarius. And it's going to move there on March the 23rd, so you can see that March is going to be a particularly important time, but it does return to Capricorn, your sector of relating, on the 11th of June. And that's going to be next year that big transformations, 2024, take place in terms of intimacy and potentially in terms of property and business. But I think you get a little insight into how things might feel from that transit of Pluto. Now, later in the year, if you're wanting to change where you live, October the 14th, the Libra new moon, that's going to be an exciting time for you. That's conjunct with Mercury. So I think that can be a positive time for you in terms of changing the property, improving it. And also the Scorpio new moon, your sister water sign of Scorpio, that forges a very structurally sound link with Saturn from the 1st of November. So November can be quite an exciting month if you are wanting to be more demonstrative. Could be good for your love life, for example. but very good for expressing your flair, talent and artistry. So in general, Cancer, this is a year when you can really find an extra spark of self-confidence and motivation. But if you feel one of the weaknesses in your situation is a lack of a professional qualification or even some academic foundations, this would be a fine time to take that course, to inform yourself, get much more in the know, and that is the influence of Saturn. But I think that all that energy in Aries is going to see you much more in the limelight, and that's going to be very exciting and potentially very gratifying. And this year, Cancer, does provide a unique opportunity for your financial situation. When Venus moves through house 2 in anyone's solar chart, usually money follows. So from the 6th of June through to the 9th of October, there is an opportunity for you, for sure, to see an improvement despite all the headwinds that last year created. I feel that you can be hopeful. Now, from the 23rd of July through to the 3rd of September, there is a retrograde. So important that if money does come in, you're not too quick to dissipate it, to spend it, to enjoy it. You know, keep it close to you if you do have some serendipity. And it could come through some kind of fortunate situation that you're not even expecting. But I have to be honest, that 4.5 month period could see you have a rock bottom resolution when it comes to any kind of diet. Sugar is a big component that you're trying to steer clear from, because you may find that anything that's remotely yummy or calorifically gooey could take on an even greater attraction to you, and that could be some rather delicious glasses of wine as well. So just be aware, huge window of opportunity. Don't be too quick to spend what you gain, but there could be some gains around weight too. So Leo, your year 2023 begins in a way a little bit steady as it goes, because there's still that cluster of energy in Capricorn, which has been dominated by Pluto for so many years now, since 2008, just pushing you to be very responsible, very organized, structured, all very worthy things, but not very much to do with being a Leo, which is about shining, which is about luminacy, it's about raising your profile. Now, of course, last year there was a lot of collective energy in the 10th house, which is about grabbing the limelight and, you know, being much more focused on how you can achieve success. Now this year you're actually going to have an opportunity to expand your horizons, do a lot more travel, perhaps have success around an academic or professional situation. But most of all, I think you're going to want to bring a much greater sense of variety into play. So things have seemed a little bit sort of responsibility led, your options have been rather limited, or you felt rather conflicted because what you really want to do for yourself, in some way or another, you're having to put other people first, and that has been holding you back. But there is some of that still ongoing, especially at the start of this year. And with Mercury also in house 6 in a retrograde at the start of the year, little niggles can be part of this year's journey for you, particularly because all the Mercury retrogrades, barring the last one, are going to be in earth signs. So for you, house 6 as the year begins, the Taurus Mercury retrograde is house 10, your professional interactions, and then the retrograde in Virgo is everyday finance. So continuing to be on the ball and marshalling all those things in a very precise way, I'm afraid, as much as it doesn't sound very exciting, that is going to be part of the process. But of course, at the start of this year, Mars, passionate Mars, is in a really handsome location for you in the sign of Gemini, and that's very much to do with interacting with others. Mars can be about our need to express our individuality, about the ego. But in the 11th house, it pushes us to find ways to achieve collaboration and cooperation with others. So right through to the third week of March, I think there's a great opportunity for your friendships to shape up in quite an exciting way. And if you are someone who's quite sporty or likes joining in community events, I think you're really going to be in your element. But we do have some big changes, of course. So let's go through the big structural ones. So what does Saturn moving into Pisces mean for you? Well, it's been in your sector of relating, so it starts this year in your sector of relating, and therefore, in terms of your solar return, relationships continue to be key for the whole of this year. I think House 7 can be about the discussion. House 8 is the outcome. So, when it comes to very deep relationships, Saturn can be quite difficult, if I'm honest. But also, if we work really hard around a business situation or being entrepreneurial or marshalling our long-term or shared finances well, Saturn can ultimately bring us success. So that's the areas that it's really asking you to look at in the time to come. Now, of course, Jupiter, the planet of opportunity, starts this year in the sign of Aries, your sister fire sign. And that's why I feel you will be traveling and expanding your horizons so much more this year, because we have two very influential Aries new moons, all about variety and being much more spontaneous. The first one links with the spring equinox, the second one with Jupiter. So a real opportunity to be much more thrusting and on the front foot and enterprising and even buccaneering from the end of April. But that does also see Mars go through a 6-week period where it's just asking you to clear up some loose ends, any residual angers or hurts or upsets from your past. Mars will push you to really confront them. But of course, the most important new moon of the whole year for you is your own. And this one is particularly special because it's Venus. Venus is conjunct the new moon in your sign. That's going to give you an awesome amount of extra radiance and sex appeal. So if you're single, really exciting. And Venus is going to be really crucial to your story this year. Venus attracts, and it's going to be in your sign for a really extended period, 4.5 months, from the 6th of June through to the 9th of October. But she is in retrograde from the 23rd of July to the 3rd of September. So what does this mean, particularly with it merging with the new moon in your sign? Well, I think it's highly likely that some kind of new start can occur around your relationship situation. Now, if you're in a relationship at the start of the year that you're devoted to, it's possible that you'll find newer ways to express yourself which can revitalize the relationship. It's also possible that if you're a creative or talented Leo, as many are, this is a wonderful window of opportunity to really showcase your artistry and talents in a much more fulsome way. But of course, the Venus retrograde could also see some uncertainty or some confusion about your relationship situation. But Saturn has really been testing to destruction almost your relationships over the last couple of years. And once it moves on the 7th of March, as I said before, it's not so much about the conversation, it's about what people really mean. But if you do go through a separation, I think this Venus transit gives you an opportunity to recast yourself in a more dynamic and alluring way. And one of the greatest ways to do that is to give ourselves a completely fresh personal look, whether it's through hair or getting a bit more trim, pursuing different interests, really embracing perhaps some talents which have been rather dormant or on the back burner, because at the start of this year that cluster of energy in Capricorn is saying to you, look, you need to be dutiful, we all need to be dutiful for part of our life, But if that duty is pulverized in your passion, that's going to starve your year of new opportunities. And because you're being pushed to be more daring, and that's going to become much more obvious once we get to the 13th of July and the North Node rotates back into the sign of Aries. And of course we are going to have the solar eclipse on the 20th or 21st of April, depending on where you are in the world. And that gives you a big push in the following 6 months to be really on the front foot when it comes to engaging with life and being that much more spontaneous, maintaining those dutiful strands but not being dominated by them. And I think that's really the key with this year. And if there is a relationship that does need to make way, I think it is going to be influenced strongly by that brief transit of Pluto into Aquarius, your opposite sign. So that happens on March the 23rd, but by June the 11th, it is back into the sign of Capricorn, so it's back into that dutiful zone. So I think if there are sort of situation or elements or strands of a relationship which need to be worked at, then Pluto certainly asks you to do that. Saturn's asking you to do that. But Jupiter catapulted into your sector of success from May the 16th for over 1 year can really see you push forwards from some of the more enterprising or experimental things you did in 2022 and really urge you to be much more dynamic. So I think that's what this year really represents for you, an opportunity to really revitalize your situation, whether it's through your personal appearance, your interest, your expression, being much more open to changing your routines, different destinations, exciting holidays, collaborating with friends. It's all to go for you, Leo. Virgo, your year 2023 is going to be very big for relationships. If you start the year and you're not in a relationship, it's possible that one is heading your way. If you're in a relationship, it probably is going to be likely that you're going to have to work at it, even if it's essentially a very good alliance. And the reason for that is that right at the start of this year, your ruler Mercury is in retrograde in house 5. So your mode of expression won't necessarily always be received in the way you mean. Also, it's possible that with Pluto and Venus later in the day, on the very first day of 2023, are in an exact conjunction. So a relationship or relationships in general of a romantic kind can prove to be fated this year. Now, we also have a full moon on the 6th of January, so it's coming quite quickly for you, and that's going to be angling up actually quite positively to Uranus. But Uranus retains its location all through this year in your sector of freedom, and Uranus is about the truth. So whilst you can be one of the most devotedly dedicated members of the zodiac, you really do apply yourself to situations that you feel strongly about. Uranus can be quite a rebel rouser and see you with a much greater than usual desire to be physically free, to do activities which give you an outlet for any restlessness that you may feel. But of course, it's March the 7th when Saturn moves into your sector of relative. So whilst your health and work may have been quite heavy going at times over the last couple of years, in terms of having to be very disciplined about keeping going, perhaps when it's been more difficult right through the COVID situation as well. But once Saturn moves into your 7th house, it's really going to test any relationship that you're in. Now, the really good ones are going to be the ones where you know where you stand, where there is a clarity. And remember, with Mercury retrograde at the start of the year, that's something that needs to be worked at this year. And Mercury is going to be retrograde through all the earth signs, remember. So for you, when it's passing through the sign of Taurus, that's that part of your horoscope that likes to be free, like Uranus. And then when it's going through your sign, that's very much about your individual need to be true to yourself. So quite a lot of pushing back against something that has been in place for a while is possible, to be honest. And with Pluto moving briefly into the sign of Aquarius, that also can ask some questions. But I think really more about the distribution of who does and contributes what in a relationship. That's really going to be the standout influence. You could find yourself drawn to someone this year with an enormous magnetism and sexuality that you find very irresistible. And I would say from the 6th of June through to the 9th of October, the chances of some kind of secret relationship or clandestine attraction, or just getting to know someone quietly as a friend, or even a reconnection to someone from your distant past, all that is possible. But with Venus going through a 4.5 month journey through your sector of reflection, that also, along with Saturn in your sector of relating, is going to provide some challenges. Now, Jupiter can also be very much about our desire to be a free spirit. Now, there's lots of very strong 8th house energy this year, with a solar eclipse on the 20th or 21st of April, depending on where we are in the world, in house 8. But also on the 21st of March, the spring equinox is conjunct a new moon in your 8th house. And also the North Node moves into your 8th house on the 13th of July. Now, the 8th house is very much about transitions, deep transitions. So, if there is a relationship where the superficial interactions between you and others is okay, I think you could find yourself craving for something that's much more meaningful. But Jupiter does move into your sister Earth sign on the 16th of May, and probably one of the things that this is going to do, it's not going to meet with Uranus this year. That's going to happen in 2024, and that's going to be a really pivotal event. But I think that is going to give you a desire to be free, so even freer. That Uranus energy is already there, but Taurus here can see you want to travel more, want to pursue any kind of interest that you've got, especially to do with history or culture. And if you're in a relationship where one partner wants to stay very close to home, I think that could be more challenging, to be honest. But the new moon in your sign, which occurs on September the 15th, is very positive in the sense of that freedom love inside of your nature, because it is linking with Uranus. So if you are single, there could be a link between the transitions or the desire that you're having to have more meaningful relationships and a desire to get off the beaten track and go to places that are different and more exciting. But that could see that very hot interaction going across 4.5 months from the 6th of June, or sadly, it could mean that you really start to struggle with the reality of an existing relationship and may feel that you have no choice during those 4.5 months to rethink, recheck, recalibrate, or perhaps even restart your life as a single person. So it just depends on your unique circumstances. But of course, remember that Neptune is still going through your sector of relating as well. And it is going to edge forward 3 degrees this year, but that can create some illusions and delusions. But it may have created some magic since 2012. But perhaps what you were drawn to in the first instance in the relationship the reality isn't really coming up to what you thought it was at the beginning. And Saturn is going to bring in a real stab of reality. Again, it's not going to meet up with Neptune this year, but I feel that the 2 planets being in your sector of relating, Saturn's really going to bring a dose of reality. So despite the fact that Venus and Pluto are in such a charismatic conjunction at the start of the year, and the Sun's forging that terrific angle to Uranus which gives you a sense of excitement, and you could head into the new year full of hope. I feel some crunching realities may become much more obvious. Also, I think in any kind of situation where you need to relate to others through business or compete, it's going to be important to set your boundaries. Now, Saturn will give you support in doing so. If you're someone who tends to find it difficult to find your voice, this can be very good for you and see you, really creating a much firmer resistance, but making it clear what you will or will not accept. So expect to be much more assertive this year about your relationships in general. So Libra, your year 2023 forecast begins with a gathering of energy once more in house 4. And I've apologised for being the celestial broken record many times, but of course Pluto takes a long time to make its transit through each zodiac sign. In fact, it takes around about 450 years to go through its entire cycle. And that gives you an idea of why it's been hanging around in your sector of home, emotion and family for so long. But on March the 23rd, which is a real fated day this year, for you particularly, it does move into the sign of Aquarius, but it goes retrograde and returns to Capricorn on June the 11th. So it only gets up to 21 minutes. But it gives you a little bit of a taste of what to expect, because in January 2024, it's moving into Aquarius for a much longer sojourn. And of course, Aquarius is house 5. It's where you can shine. And house 5 is very much about children, playfulness, joys of life, social interaction, and so something to really look forward to. But of course, this year is the pressing issue. And Saturn, of course, has been in house 5 for the last couple of years, and that's no easy combination. So there's been a lot going on around the home emotional part of your situation, but also the romantic situation, social situation, reflected by the limitation on our ability to meet up and connect to one another through COVID, has also been quite a tough hoe. So the great news this year is that Saturn makes way. It goes on March the 7th into your 6th house. But of course, if you're someone who's really into your astrology, you'll know that wherever Saturn is, it tends to teach us a lesson. So the next couple of years, it's asking you to think about your work. It's asking you to think about the level of exercise you get. Are your everyday habits quite as streamlined and as organized as they could be? So virtue is the big message from Saturn this year. But Pluto gives you a little taste in that brief passage into Aquarius of a desire for something much deeper and bigger. But going back to that collective in the sign of Capricorn, because one of the conjunctions is precise, and that's between Pluto and Venus. So if you want or have been craving to find the right home for you, even if where you live has its qualities or benefits, I think that your desire to manifest that this year is going to be enormously strong. The problem is, of course, that Mercury's in retrograde when the turn of the year occurs. So it still could be a bit, a bit touch and go. There may be some frustrations. Things may not flow quite as you would like, but it's in touching distance, I feel. Also because the Sun forges a link with Uranus at the start of this year, and also the full moon occurs on the 6th of January. That's on the angle of your 10th and 4th house cusp. So your work situation or your preparedness to be flexible can create opportunities around where you live, but it could be a little bit fluid. And if you're someone who likes to really know where you stand, that obviously can be a bit more challenging. But, and this is really gorgeous for you, because relationships can really offer some opportunities this year. And as you come into the new year, that might not necessarily be the thing that you're actually conscious of. In fact, on the 21st of January, when we have the Aquarius new moon, Venus, your ruler, in Aquarius, is conjunct Saturn. So just when house 5 is activated, there's a bit of a downer there with Saturn oppressing your ruler. But all that's doing is making you much more picky, I feel, of who you will let into your world, who the right person can be. And there's a sensational event on the 21st of March when the spring equinox is also in conjunction with the new moon in your 7th house of relating. That's very, very encouraging. But then we have a solar eclipse on the 20th or 21st of April, depending on where you are in the world, and that's conjunct Jupiter, the planet of opportunity. So for the following 6 months, your relationship sector is given an enormous lift. But of course, there's also a solar eclipse in your sign on the 14th of October, but that's in an opposition to the North Node, which goes into your 7th house on the 13th of July. I'm really loving all of this for you. It's absolutely fabulous. And of course, Mars, the planet of daring, starts this year, although retrograde, it starts this year in your sector of exploration. So the more you can get off the beaten track and push yourself out of your normal domain, the more likely you are to stimulate some exciting action in all different areas of your life. But the other big takeout of this year is that from the 6th of June to the 9th of October, your ruler Venus is in the sign of Leo. Leo will give Venus so much radiance, and the more you can push yourself to mix and mingle, the more likely it is that your social situation or your love life can be rejuvenated. Now, it is true that Venus is retrograde from the 23rd of July to the 3rd of September. Nothing's perfect, particularly in astrology. We always have contrasting energies competing against one another. But I think with those two eclipses, Libra, and Venus, your ruler, in such a friendly zone. Now, Jupiter does move into the sign of Taurus on the 16th of May, and Taurus, like your sign, is governed by Venus. But for you, this is the 8th house. This is where we gain from our associations from others, perhaps even intimately, perhaps financially, perhaps in a business situation, and Jupiter's going to be there for the following year and a bit more. So that's going to be wonderfully optimistic and positive too around relationships, because it gives you a little bit more push to, yes, Saturn's saying make sure you mark out your territory and don't let anyone too close that's not right for you. But if someone does come in who is, someone you can work on, relationships require enormous work. None of them are given to us on a platter. I think Jupiter moving into that area can see you both pitching in and really trying to do your best. So I feel that, especially with Jupiter conjunct the North Node on the 1st of June, that could also be very good as far as a property matter is concerned, or in terms of some financial good fortune. So a lot to go for. And in terms of the new moon in your sign this year, it is conjunct Mercury, and it does occur on the 14th of October. So your ability to think on your feet, to use your natural air quality to communicate effectively is really being liberated. But I think right at the start of this year, it can feel very tender, still very much about those emotional and family and where to live issues. But as this year goes on, I think it's much more about engaging with others. And I think it can turn out to be a surprisingly upbeat and exciting year for you, Libra. Scorpio, your year 2023 forecast suggests some very Scorpionic energies are going to be washing around your communications and interactions with people this year. So what do I mean? When you discuss things with people, you often are relating to them, but perhaps also absorbing the conversation in a different way to perhaps they are. Your depth of nature and sensitivity means that how you process information isn't always readily available to others. Part of this is a protective measure for you to keep, not necessarily secret, but certainly a protective barrier in place so that people can't see some of your vulnerabilities too easily. So some Scorpios can chat along quite easily with other people, but there is another layer of communication which is not always open and available for others to attune to. So that takes very close relationships. And this year, that interaction with others is going to be really interesting, because I think you may encounter lots of Scorpio type conversations or Scorpio type people. It can be very stimulating, but it also can be rather challenging, because people may probe you the way you've probed them in the past. And if you take that in your stride, there's a lot of opportunities this year to really evolve your way of relating to other people. There's some standout chances to do so. So as we start the year, your traditional ruler Mars is in a part of your horoscope which is stirring up some deep stuff about desire. It can be about sex, can be about money. It can just be a desire for true intimacy. And that doesn't necessarily just come through the physical act of sex. It comes from being so close to somebody. And that could be something you yearn for, but it won't just be that. Their ideas or belief systems need to match yours as well. Because I think this is an area that's very vivid this year, but also very alive to potential change and progression. Now, Mercury, the planet of communication, ironically, is in retrograde. So you may have some misunderstandings this year, but actually can help you to grow if you're open to revise your way of thinking about things and even your way of expressing yourself. So that sounds a little bit challenging, but there's lots of opportunities. I must really stress that. Now, Mars is going to be going square with Neptune for the last time. There's 3 passes at this, and that's going to be exact on March the 14th. But on March the 25th, it moves into your sister water sign of Cancer. And that's going to see you feeling much more outgoing. But of course, Saturn has been providing something of a handbrake to your emotions, your home life, your family situation over the last couple of years, which may have been hugely frustrating, especially if you've got a planetary position, anything from 0 degrees Scorpio through to about 16, 17, 18 degrees, because of the square between Uranus and Saturn, which has been so prevalent. So that tension has taken a little bit of a toll, I would say. But of course, Saturn is going to be moving on March the 7th into your 5th house. And it's not coming back to your 4th house for around about another 26 and a half years. So, what does it mean moving into your sister water sign of Pisces? So the 3 triplicities are Cancer, Pisces and Scorpio. Water, feeling. Now, Saturn in Pisces can help us to try to develop a more constructive approach to the feeling plane. But Saturn obviously is mainly concerned with structures, and it's hard to have structures around feelings. But I feel that if you are in a romantic relationship, for example, where the communication isn't going backwards and forwards quite as agilely as you would like, Saturn's going to flag that up this year. And there may be times when your normal sense of appreciation of things could be slightly toned down. Your physical vitality also could be a little lower with this transit. But Saturn, whichever sector it goes through, always has an implication. And going through the 5th house, if you're single, could bring someone really seriously important into your world over the next 2.5 years, or it could push you to make the most of your talents in a way that you haven't quite been doing so far. But I'm not being critical. This is all about how we evolve in our life, because I think it may be your job sector where your creativity is going to find a new outlet this year, and in the most exciting way. But if we just go back to that very powerful total lunar eclipse of the 8th of November, a relationship matter may be on your mind as you come into this year. And Uranus, the planet that is so to do with restlessness, is in your sector of relating all year. So just be aware of that. Because the North Node starts this year in the sign of Taurus, but by the 1st of June it is going to align with Jupiter, and Jupiter's move into your opposite sign, which occurs on the 16th of May, can bring huge opportunities around the way you relate to people, not just romantically, but I feel that some astrologers may characterize Jupiter moving into the 7th house as almost certain to bring the perfect relationship into your world. So Jupiter in the sign of Taurus isn't just about romantic relationships, it's about all sorts of relationships, and Jupiter is about opportunity. So Uranus in its angle with the Sun at the start of this year is saying stay resolutely open-minded about who you can get on with. That's crucial. With Pluto, your modern ruler, moving just briefly into Aquarius, which is going to happen on March the 23rd. So the end of March is very, very loaded with significance. I think it will only get to 21 minutes, but it's going to perhaps evoke some of the issues that Saturn did through its transit through Aquarius, but maybe a deeper yearning for some kind of perfect environment to flourish in. Now that can be our home, it can be in all sorts of ways. You may find yourself with a much greater desire to be near water, for example, once Pluto moves into Aquarius for the longer term, which will be in early January 2024. So we have the eclipse which occurs on the 20th or 21st of April, depends on where you are in the world, and that is in your sector of reforming the basics in your world, potentially work, but that is going to be squaring Pluto, so that could be quite challenging for you. Fortunately, the new moon, which occurs on March the 21st, which is the spring equinox, and at the start of Cardinal Quadrant 1, gives you a lot of encouragement to really think about how you can change your working situation. And those two events, because obviously the solar eclipse lasts for 6 months, can really spur you on. But being very open-minded about how you interact with people, how you communicate with people, how you exchange ideas, not necessarily taking umbrage if people see things differently. So really entering into a spirit of dialogue. We live in a world where people are very polarized in their opinions. Many people want to express an opinion that don't so much want a conversation. So this year is really asking you to have a series of important, but I think very deep, potentially, conversations which can be absolutely life-changing for you. Now, of course, your ruler Mars, once it does move into Cancer, that's wonderful for you, but it is also going to be moving into your sign, and that's going to happen on the 12th of October. And that really will give you quite a lot of lift as you come into the last phase of the year, because the solar eclipse, which occurs on the 14th of October, is potentially going to be a little bit challenging. And the reason for that is the North Node continues its reversal, as it always does, and then on the 13th of July moves into Aries. So that reform to the structural part of your life, the everyday organisation, your health, fitness, diet, work, where you help others, where you get a sense of satisfaction from providing services, that's a very vibrant area. But your relationship sector, very vibrant. Your everyday communicational sector, very vibrant. So there's lots to go for. However, we do have a lunar eclipse in your sign, which occurs on the 5th or 6th of May, depending on where you are. And that's opposite Uranus. So if there is any dissatisfaction with a relationship, it may show itself from that point, particularly with Saturn now being domiciled in the sign of Pisces, which 5th house is romance. So just be conscious of that. Also, Mars, your traditional ruler, is in opposition with your modern ruler on May the 21st. So that's going to be an interesting aspect. And that side of you that can be a little bit intense. I hope you're not offended by me saying that. I have a lot of Scorpio in my own chart, and that intensity can really be ratcheted up, especially around a deeply personal issue, or perhaps how you want to manifest your talents in the wider world, and whether your personal situation, or perhaps fears, or even anxieties could in some way get in the way, or even family members' needs of your bid to be more successful. So that's really an important point too. Also this year, November the 1st, there is the new moon in your sign, but it's actually forging a really stable link to Saturn. So that's lovely. So 1st, 5th, if there is a relationship that's shaping up well for you, that gives it a real vote of confidence. It's making it more solid. But on the 28th of October, just before that, there is a lunar eclipse. But that too is actually, it's in your opposite sign, but that too forges a positive link to Saturn. So you can see that your opportunities this year come from combining your depth of understanding and how you decode conversations in quite a psychological way, and understanding that other people could be like that towards you for a large proportion of this year. But there is, between the 6th of June and the 9th of October, a chance for you to use your guile and your charm to great effect when it comes to your career. In fact, if a romantic situation is going well, it could be through that 4.5 months that you do something that's more to do with progressing it to the next level of commitment. And it's also possible for some Scorpios that there would be a connection with someone through your work, or someone from a different age group. But Venus in the 10th house is excellent if you want to do well in interviews or presentations and come across in a way that's persuasive, but at the same time very confident, but not so confident that it's off-putting to the person that you're needing to interact with. So this is a really exciting year in lots of ways, but Saturn in the 5th house is pushing you to make the most of your talents. You have to work at it. You may have to work at a romantic relationship, whether it's an ongoing tie or one that comes into your world fresh. But your desire to have extra stimulation around romance is definitely strong still. But Jupiter and the North Node in that conjunction on the 1st of June, when it's exact, are really going to be very helpful. And in fact, they are within 3 degrees in a great conjunction between the 17th of May and the 16th of June. So a real window of opportunity. So conveying your ideas with conviction, but allowing other people to convey theirs with conviction, not necessarily having an issue with people having different ideas to you, having relationships in your world that feel truthful, that feel authentic, being prepared to work very hard on your talents. And there are some real opportunities to really make progress this year for you, Scorpio. So, Sagittarius, your year 2023 forecast begins with that cluster of energy in the sign of Capricorn, which is house 2 for you. But where this area has proved to be a little bit touch and go when it comes to income over the last 4 or 5 years, this year with Venus very close to Pluto as the years turn, that gives you a real opportunity to attract goodness to you, despite the prevailing headwinds that we're all dealing with in terms of the cost of living. But of course, Mercury is retrograde in that area, so there may be some rethinking that's required. And that flexibility, which is an inherent part of your nature, can really be an asset for you in general this year, because the midpoint for the year is in the sign of Pisces. So that's asking you to really be mindful of your emotional foundations. But Neptune has been there since 2012, and that has been causing some fogginess, uncertainty around your home, emotional and family situation. Because Saturn is going to be moving into this area on the 7th of March. Now, Saturn always brings with it some kind of demand, but also opportunities, which is much less spoken about. In natal astrology, when I'm working with clients, often when Saturn moves over a key house cusp, if someone has really applied themselves, that can lead to breakthroughs. Whereas, of course, in traditional astrology, your ruler Jupiter is known as the greater benefic, and it can be very helpful in terms of providing slices of serendipity, but we can't sit back and just wait for things to come to us. So with Saturn moving into that 4th house, it's not going to combine with Neptune this year. It does suggest that maybe you're going to be building something up around where you live. Some kind of reconstruction is possible. So a renovation for some archers could be in the mix. Or perhaps you're actually going to be downsizing, being a little bit more applied in how you can make the most of your resources. It could also be a time when extra responsibilities come to you in terms of your family life. So that could be an addition to the family, particularly with that midpoint in Pisces, in a very fortunate part of everyone's situation, and it can bring some delightful surprises. But Jupiter does start this year still in your sister fire sign of Aries. And Aries is house 5 for you, and that's going to be a sector of real opportunities, despite the fact that Jupiter is going to be saying goodbye in May and moving into a much more practical area. And the reason that you've got opportunities in this area this year is that as the year begins, Mars is in your sector of relating, but of course that's moving on the 25th of March, moves on after its long sojourn of 7 months and 6 days, but it is retrograde as the year begins. So patience will be important around relationship matters, I feel. But Jupiter is going to start the year in that glorious location with its location in Aries, but it is forging a pretty positive link to Mars. So that provides some action is possible around relationships despite Mars's retrograde. But what we're going to have this year is a very strong March. So the solstice, which occurs on the 21st, is going to combine with a new moon in house 5 for you. And this is where you can be much more demonstrative and outgoing. But then the solar eclipse is also in house 5 of the 20th or 21st of April, depending on where you live. And that also can provide some uplift to you. Now, also the eclipse is going to be conjunct Jupiter, your ruler. So the following 6 months can see you really flourishing, and it could be despite the more restraining energies of Saturn in your 4th house, which is going to make you much more conscious of issues of security. The following 6 months can really see you, push out, and that can be very dynamic for you. Now, of course, also March, incredibly important, because on the 23rd, Pluto moves from your sector of resources where it starts the year in that very tight conjunction with Venus, which I think can be lucky for you. It moves just briefly into the sign of Aquarius. It only gets up to 21 degrees before on the 11th of June rewinding back into the sign of Capricorn. So maybe an idea that you've got that's very important to you can start to gain traction, but it will really gain a lot of oxygen in January 2024, when your life is going to change quite radically, I feel, particularly if you've got ideas and creative streams that you really want to put at the center of your universe. But on the 12th of July, the North Node also moves into the sign of Aries. So you can see House 5, despite that limiting influence of Saturn, is actually shaping up superbly well for you. This is the sector of joys, of delights, of creativity and flair, of children, but also of our social life, and crucially of romance, if that's something that is important to you. But Jupiter does move on the 16th of May into your 6th house, and that's an area where Uranus has been, along with the North Node, which will rewind back into the 6th house of your situation, because it moves in, it's a nominal point, but it's moving backwards the whole time. But there is a conjunction between Jupiter and the North Node on the 1st of June. You could get some really good news about a job around that time. If it doesn't happen on that exact date, it's certainly possible between the 17th of May and the 16th of June. So something to do with a job or getting more recognition for your hard work and application is entirely possible. Now, on May the 21st, there is a bit of a dust-up in the heavens between Mars and Pluto. Mars at that stage is in your sister fire sign of Leo, which is very much about being very dramatic and being more adventurous, very much in keeping with the virtues and qualities of your sign. But of course, this has to compete with the more restraining influences of Saturn in your emotional sector. But from the 6th of June to the 9th of October, you get a real dividend in this year that's particularly relevant to you, because Venus will be making its way through your sector of truth, but also your sector of travel. And Venus can be brilliant in the 9th house when it comes to appreciating different cultural, philosophical or historical contexts. And of course you have a strong appreciation of those areas at the best of time, but it could also see you connecting to someone at a distance whilst in an existing relationship. If there is a difficulty getting clarity, the retrograde from the 23rd of July through to the 3rd of September will see you determined to try to tease out the truth of what the relationship is really about. Now, this year, the Mercury retrogrades are all in earth signs, as you know, and that means that when it comes to your practical resources, you will need to be very attentive to micromanaging them all through the year. However, on the 14th of October, you have a gorgeous solar eclipse in your sector of friendship. Now, this is also going to be forging an opposition with the North Node in the sign of Aries. So it's possible that if you are looking for a partnership or some kind of new exciting connection as far as your love life is concerned, it could come through a mutual acquaintance, an introduction by a friend, or some kind of group event, but with two very social and interactive solar eclipses this year. That really helps you. However, the lunar eclipses are more complex for you because they're working across the 6th and 12th houses, just like 2022. So much more psychological and much more to do with your health and energy. So it is going to be important with Saturn in your 4th house that you do really practice trying to rehearse your thinking and responses to be very much in keeping with the core being of your sign, which is that in unmistakable optimism. If you keep holding on to that, even if you do encounter some strains and some difficulties, I think that really will be a very positive thing. Now, the new moon which occurs is a bit challenging because that does square up with Saturn. So it's just saying basically that what you want to achieve as an individual, you need to take into account what the emotional dimension of those goals and ambitions are. If you do that, that will be helpful to you. Now, I mentioned about all the retrogrades being in earth signs this year, but of course the last one, just briefly, from the middle of December to the end of the year, is in your sign. So together with that new moon on the 23rd of November, you can see that patience will be important this year. You know, realism, especially in this very complex world that we're inhabiting at the moment, is definitely something that we should all be mindful of. But I feel that, you know, your situation has been quite stressed around finance and also your physical health over the last few years. I think there's been quite a lot of pressures in that area, and I think this year does provide a real opportunity to move forwards. You still need to keep working systematically and in a disciplined way to make the most of your talents, to get more tangible rewards. But I think by the end of the year, despite that awkward new moon and that Mercury retrograde, I think you can look back on this year as a year of genuine progress. So Capricorn, your year 2023 forecast begins with an epic lineup of planets in your sign. Now, of course, the combination between Pluto, which has been so influential for you over the last year, since 2008, is in a combination with Venus, the planet of allure, the planet of attraction. Well, Pluto, of course, can be to do with the fates. It can also be to do with desire. And of course, it can be to do with power. But your power to transform your ideas, to take your creativity and to draw goodness to yourself with it, or even through transforming your personal appearance, gives you a unique opportunity this year to captivate other people's attention. Also, the Sun is forging a fantastic angle to Uranus, the planet of change, and that also provides some electricity and buzz. Uranus continues its journey through house 5, very much pushing you to demonstrate how unique and different you are. Your sign is very much about the established. It's about foundations of a very solid kind. Uranus in your 5th house is pushing you to take those core talents and approaches, but in some way add a different and more varied approach, and that's where the opportunities lie. The challenge, of course, Mercury is in retrograde as this year begins. So there may be some ideas that you get so far with this year, but then you decide not to continue with. But at the very end of the year, when Mercury is going through its retrograde in the sign that precedes yours, Sagittarius, you're going to be quite reflective about what 2023 has held for you. But I feel that wherever you end up with those ideas, it will be the right place for you. So if some things don't quite pan out as you intend or initially hope, see it as part of the rich experience of informing your direction, because every time you gain more knowledge, you are directing yourself in a much more defined way. So sometimes we have to go through a little bit of experimentation in order to get to where we really need to be. And of course, Saturn, your ruling planet, has been in a mightily punishing right angle with Uranus over the last couple of years. They're broadly in touch at the start of this year, but I don't think they're going to be anywhere near as trying for you. Those have kind of been anti-risk. And of course, Saturn in your 2nd house may have meant that your finances have required very careful handling. And it's not to say that everything that you've been working with in the past has come to an end, but there may have been some distinct need for modification. However, Saturn moving forwards on March the 7th into your 3rd house suggests the next 2.5 years it's going to be very much about communication in your everyday world. So there could be some strains potentially with neighbours or siblings. Saturn, we know, can provide challenges, but also perhaps Saturn in this location is pushing you to learn more. The third house can be about information or to disseminate your ideas to other people, but in a very structured way. Now, because Saturn is your ruler, it can be an energy that you can work with better than most signs, because your natural way of being is to just dig in, be very solid, keep going through the processes, do your best with whatever available resources you've got, and that makes you one of the ultimate survivors of the zodiac. So the third house just means that I feel that the way you interact with people and your ideas, there could be a little bit of tension that creeps in, but it could be a time that you learn a great deal more about the flow of communication and how ideas are exchanged, and particularly around comprehension. It's not just about what we say, it's whether we receive information as it's meant, or whether what we're saying is understood as it's meant by others. So Saturn moving forwards is a big deal for sure. Now, on the 6th of January, we do have a full moon in your opposite sign, and that is going to oppose that Mercury retrograde, but also forge an actual positive link to Uranus. So you may find even the New Year's resolutions that you've made in between Christmas and the New Year can almost straight away start to be tested a little bit. But if you can be open to the process of change, then you can just go with it with Uranus, and that actually can be very, very positive. Now, if you find yourself moving or improving this year, it really wouldn't be a surprise. There's an incredibly powerful March for us all. Of course, there's that Saturn relocation on the 7th, but we also have Mars coming to the end of its long sojourn through the sign of Gemini on the 25th. And for you, Gemini is very much about practicalities. So you will start this year, I think, with quite a lot of physical energy. Yes, it's true that Mars is initially in retrograde, and there may have been some frustrations around your work, or perhaps you've had kind of an excess of nervous energy but haven't quite known what to do with it. But actually Mars forges a very positive link to Jupiter at the start of this year, and I think that that can give you a lot of heft when it comes to engaging with the early part of this year. But going back to March, we have that relocation of Saturn, relocation of Mars into your opposite sign. So from the 25th, for the following 6 weeks, that could be a time when you're going to find yourself being a little bit more combative when it comes to your boundaries and your relationships. But Pluto moves, just very briefly, on March the 23rd into the sign of Aquarius. Now, by the 11th of June, it is going to return to your sign. What does this mean? Well, by the time that Pluto moves for a much longer journey through Aquarius in the early part of January 2024, your whole attitude and mindset to materialism and resources and money is going to completely shift. Now, that doesn't mean to say that you're not going to retain some of your existing approaches, but Pluto is very much about transformation, and the second house is how we consume, but it's also about money. So I think, this is a preparatory year in some ways for the big change that's going to come with Pluto's energy in early 24. But if you have been working on something that's deeply important to you since 2008, particularly if you are older, then you're going to start to see all your plans reach a fruition, and you can get a window into that this year, not least from the fact that on the 16th of May, Jupiter is going to be moving into your 5th house. How delicious is that? There's also a wonderful conjunction between Jupiter and the North Node on the 1st of June. That can be very auspicious for your love life for sure. But remember I said a while ago that moving and also perhaps improving can be part of this year's developments. And that's because the solar eclipse, which occurs on the 20th of April or the 21st, depending on where you live, is going to be in conjunction with Jupiter. So that is going to provide huge opportunities in the following 6 months to get your home or emotional or family world really exactly as you want, and a lot of support there. Now that particular eclipse is going to square up Pluto. It is potentially going to be a very pivotal time for us all. But the lunar eclipse, which occurs on the 5th or 6th of May, that is actually in a tremendously friendly area for you and in an opposition with Uranus. So surprise developments around your social situation are possible in the following 6 months. But then the solar eclipse of the 14th of October is asking you to reach for the stars when it comes to your goals and ambitions. And having the confidence in your emotional strength and security to raise your profile is part of what that solar eclipse is going to offer you, and that's going to make its way into the first couple of, 3 or 4 months of 2024. So you've got a lot to be excited about for 24. But the lunar eclipse, which occurs on the 28th of October, is back in your friendship zone, but it is forging a sextile with Saturn. And this is what I mean about Saturn. We can view Saturn as being a negative influence in its entirety, but as you know, application and perspiration often achieve results. Talent alone is not enough. It's the approach. So I think that this is a year when you can become much more structured in your thinking. If there are things that you want to express, for example, if you've thought of writing a book or setting your own website up or becoming more active with technology, then, or learning a course or teaching people talents you've got, Saturn can really help you to shine this year. But once the North Node does move back into Aries on the 13th of July, again, you're being asked to think about home, emotion, family. So creativity can be important. Productivity, always important to Capricorns, needs to be melded with passion. Otherwise, things can become rather soulless and a little bit empty. Now, I mentioned to you about the opposition between Mars in your 7th house from the 25th of March onwards for 6 weeks, but also on May the 21st, Mars is in an opposition with Pluto, but just in the sign of Aquarius. You could encounter someone around that time who you find to be absolutely, totally captivating. Can you resist them? It's possible that someone can really make your pulse race. Now, in terms of Venus's journey through the heavens this year, it is going to be in the sign of Leo for 4.5 months. And for you, that's a very hot and intense part of your situation. If you are wanting to get on the front foot when it comes to entrepreneurship, Venus can be helpful because it is the planet of money, not just the planet of relating. But of course, it does have its retrograde from the 23rd of July through to the 3rd of September. And this part of your chart is also about where we get much more intimate and sensual with someone. If you are single or you're wanting to find an extra spark in your love life in an existing relationship, those 4.5 months are going to be a critical part of this year. Now, Mars is going to be moving into Scorpio on the 12th of October. What's the significance of that? Well, we're just running into the kind of autumn, pre-Christmas social period, and Mars is really going to help you to sharpen up what you're wanting from the year, from the time that leads up to the end of the year. So that's going to be very, very important to you. Now, the curtain comes down on the year with the winter solstice combining with the retreating Mercury, which makes its way at that time from your sign into your 12th house, the sign of Sagittarius, where Mercury's not at its best. There could be a sense of sentimentality as 2023 ends. I think you may find yourself actually a little bit surprisingly in the mood to embrace the more traditional values of Christmas, not so much the more social interactive side of things, but thinking very much about the people that are really important to you. You could find yourself cocooning yourself away a little bit just as the year comes to a close. But Cardinal Quadrant 4 is a very important part of the year, because as the sun moves into your sign on the 23rd of December, we're starting the next 13-week period of the astrological year, which begins on the spring equinox, not on the 1st of January. So I think just at the end of this year, yeah, there could be some mulling, that more sort of sentimental side of your nature could come out as you really think about what a dramatic year it's been. But I think there can be some changes to where you live. I feel that your work situation also gives you an opportunity to really shine, certainly in the last 2.5-3 months of the year. And in terms of, the more physical side of things, with Venus on Pluto right at the start of the year, I think your desire to be admired, adored, embraced is going to be very strong, and that's certainly revved up hugely by that Venus transit through your 8th house, which goes on for 4.5 months. So there's a lot happening this year beyond just Saturn relocating into the sign of Pisces. So Aquarius, your year 2023 forecast begins with a collective of energy in the rather quiet and reflective 12th house. But one of those energies is Venus. And it's possible in its conjunction with Pluto right at the start of this year that could make you really quite nostalgic for past associations or connections. With Mercury in your 12th house in retrograde, you may find, however, that it's a bit of a muted start to the new year. It is true that Mars, the planet of drive and passion, is in your sister air sign through to the 25th of March, and Mars is too retrograde just for the first few days of this year. But it's actually forging a very dynamic link with Jupiter, the planet of growth and optimism. So despite the retrograde, and despite what seems like, a fairly quiet time, by the time of the Aquarius new moon on the 21st, that really is going to see energy start to bubble up. And also there is a conjunction between Venus and Saturn then. So I think Venus being in the 12th house, combining with Pluto, Mercury's retrograde in the 12th house initially, and Saturn being quite influential on Venus on your new moon on the 21st, means that as you come into this year, you may really be wondering when things are going to burst into life. But of course, Saturn is going to be moving in March on the 7th. Saturn's journey through the sign of Aquarius has probably meant that you've had to narrow your focus. Anytime you spread yourself a little wider, it seems to have slapped you down. So it's had to be a very focused effort. And of course, it has been in an intense square with the other ruler of Aquarius, the modern higher octave ruler of Uranus. So house 4, very much about where you live, how you live there, and whom with, has been competing with house 1, where you want to be an individual, and you may have felt really quite restricted. So all of this has been creating a lot of frustration over the last couple of years, and as you come into the start of this year, you may find yourself feeling a little bit of trepidation about how things are going to unfold. But once Saturn moves, moving into the second solar house means it's asking you to really work hard on the foundations of your existence. And if you've been working enormously hard on a creative strand over the last couple of years, now you can start to see the progress. But as ever with Saturn, the harder we work, the luckier we get. yes, you can have luck with Saturn, because all that application and perspiration can give rewards. But it is possible that some form of income could dry up a little bit, and you may have to be creative to bring in other forms of income to replace that. But see this as a process that gives you opportunities, because of course Pluto is going to arrive in Aquarius on the 23rd. It is going to reverse back into the sign of Capricorn on the 11th of June, however, so it is a very brief sojourn. So if your sun is right at the start of Aquarius, you're much more likely to feel the power of Pluto in this location than, say, if your sun is further into the sign of Aquarius. But for all Aquarius people, the start of 2024 is going to be a completely new phase in our existence. Now, it just so happens for me, my sun is at 30 minutes in Aquarius, 0 degrees 30, so I am going to feel that Pluto very strongly in equal house, 4th house. So that's where I live, who I live with, maybe news on the family front. In Placida's 3rd house, so maybe transformation in my ideas and personal expression. Exciting for me, possibly challenging too. But of course, this year isn't just about the movements of Saturn and Pluto. There's so much more going on, as you can see from Mars. So Mars, once it goes into forward motion in early January, is really going to give you an opportunity to be more flamboyant. And it may not feel that you can be flamboyant in the early part of the year because the planets are all rather introspective. But that's been a pattern for quite some time, since 2008. But Saturn's move on the 7th of March also sees it join up with Neptune. And since 2012, Neptune may have made it rather difficult to know exactly where life's foundations are. There may have been some illusions over money. You may have been actually very generous to those who are less fortunate. But Saturn can bring a bit more of a no-nonsense approach to handling finances, perfect in these rising cost times, because your discipline and ability to think outside the box is really going to be rewarded. But also in March, we have on the 21st, the new moon is going to be conjunct the spring equinox. So that is really quite significant. Now, the spring equinox also sees the beginning of cardinal quadrant 1, but for Aquarius people, this is very much about how we think and express our ideas. And that part of the zodiac for Aquarius people this year is absolutely supercharged, because on the 20th or 21st of April, we have a second Aries lunation, but this one is going to be conjoining with Jupiter, the planet of opportunity. But there is a square with Pluto in Aquarius. So the desire to express ideas and to have our voices heard is really going to be very strong in the next 6 months. So really powerful stuff. Now, of course, Jupiter is the planet of growth, but it is going to be relocating. And on the 16th of May, it moves into Taurus. Now, because Uranus, the North Node, and Mars in the latter part of April and early August last year caused quite a tremor around home, family, and emotional issues, it is possible that something that you thought was going to evolve actually didn't. There was some sudden change, sudden alteration, some kind of shock, a bit like a Tower card moment in the tarot. But Jupiter moving into this area is going to bring a lot of potential for healing. So in the following year and more, Jupiter goes back into a more typical pattern. And Jupiter actually really thrives in the sign of Taurus. So some good news around a property matter, where you live, or even an addition to the family is entirely possible. The exact point of the conjunction between the North Node and Jupiter is the 1st of June, but from the 17th of May to the 16th of June, there is a window of opportunity for some good fortune. So that's really exciting to know. Now, or I should say on May the 21st, there is an opposition between Mars, but which by that time has moved into your opposite sign, and Pluto in Aquarius. There could be a bit of a row, to be honest. Maybe it's going to be a marking out of territory. Somebody who's not being very just in their approach, you may have to really push back and assert your power in a situation. If you find that difficult, if you're a more gentle type of person, actually doing so can be really good for you. If you're someone who finds it, comes more naturally to live in your own power and express your ideas, this can be a point when you really are very passionate and ventilated in your ideals. But it could be about a relationship that some kind of push-pull in terms of power occurs at that time. But from the 6th of June through to the 9th of October, Venus begins to give us Aquarius people a huge bonus ball for this year, a celestial orb of magic, because yes, Venus is going to be sitting for 4.5 months in your sector of relating, and this can be enormously lucky. It is true that from the 23rd of July to the 3rd of September, Venus retraces its steps. Venus retrograde in a natal horoscope often sees people get married or forge more serious relationships later in their life, or attracted to more profound ties rather than sort of just being very matey with lots of different types of people. But relationships definitely can have a wonderful opportunity to thrive through this 4.5 month period. And of course, on the 13th of July, the North Node rewinding into Aries, meaning it's picking up on that energy from that solar eclipse. It's moving into your sector of ideas. So on the 14th of October, the solar eclipse in Libra forges a beautiful link to the North Node. It's an opposition. Your ability to convey ideas with a degree of charm or passion is definitely going to be supercharged. So if you are someone who wants to, influence people through your inspiration, then the last quarter of this year is going to be particularly significant. The two lunar eclipse pairs this year are still in Scorpio and Taurus, just like the 4 sets of eclipses were in 2022. But that made it a very turbulent year for home, emotion and family vis-a-vis the demands around work. This year, there's more of an opportunity for you to thrive, but it's still going to be important to be mindful of a need for security. And the first lunar eclipse of the 5th or 6th of May is in an opposition with Uranus, your modern ruler. So that can create a degree of instability. The latter one, on the 28th of October, actually forges a really positive angle to Saturn. So all the hard work that's gone in over a long period of time can start to really see results financially right at the end of this year. Now, obviously, in terms of relationships, the position of Venus this year is entirely helpful, but also so is the Leo new moon of August the 16th, which embraces Venus as well. So the following month also supercharges an already very positive dimension as far as your relationship situation is concerned. Now, Uranus and Saturn, your two co-rulers, are broadly in square this year at the start of the year. It's about 7 degrees, but this is nowhere near as difficult as it's been over the previous 2 years. So I think tension generally is going to dissipate to some degree. But we do have those Mercury retrogrades. So the first one, as you know, is in the psychological 12th house, which could see you a little bit tentative as you come into this new year. The second one is in The fourth house, very much about where you live and work. So it may, even with the help of Jupiter in the North Node, still not quite get there exactly in the time frame you want, but the direction of travel is very positive. But cross wires around the family or emotional matter are possible. And then we have the Virgo Mercury retrograde, and I think for you that can be very much about transformations in your life. You could find yourself thinking again very deeply about the meaning of life. The last Mercury retrograde is in Capricorn, but then reverses into the sign of Sagittarius. So I think as the end of the year comes to its conclusion, there may be a need to rethink some longer term plans or some friendships. Then it's going to be important to work very hard at the communicational dimension. But I will say that on the 12th of October, there is a wonderful position of Mars which can push you to raise your profile and be more dynamic in terms of your self-confidence. So an enormous amount to go for this year, to be honest, Aquarius. The careful understanding of resources is something we're all being asked to do. I think the Earth is almost asking us to do that. That if we don't change our ways, all the sort of natural phenomenon of flooding and fires and earthquakes and tsunamis and water levels dropping or rising through floods, all these different climatic events are very much to do with the Earth. And of course, the sign of Pisces is very much to do with the water on Earth. So you can be a natural conservationist, and I think those instincts are really going to be enhanced by Saturn in Pisces. It could be a time when you become even more conscious of recycling things, upcycling things, buying clothes that perhaps are pre-owned in some ways, or making food from scratch, being more enterprising around resources. It doesn't have to just be a straightforward case of a reduction of income. I think it's a case of using what we have in a better way, and that's going to be true of all citizens of the world, not just us Aquarius people. So all the best, and thank you for now. So Pisces, your year 2023 forecast. Now, of course, the big talking point is going to be the arrival of Saturn, the planet of structure, in your sign on the 7th of March. Now, the flagging up that this will get could make you a little bit tentative about what this will mean. But I want to reassure you that Saturn's journey through the sign of Aquarius over the last 2.5 years is likely to have been an awful lot more challenging than what's coming. And the reason for that is Saturn in your own sign may have a limiting effect on your physicality, but it's been having an enormous impact on your psychology and your desire to interact with people. Now, of course, you have Neptune in the sign of Pisces, your ruler, at the start of this year. They're not going to come together this year. So Neptune's been there since 2012 and really been pushing you to express your Piscean virtues. And on April the 12th, 2022, Jupiter, your traditional ruler, and Neptune came together in an exact conjunction. But I feel a little bit too much was made of this because of the role of Saturn locked in your 12th house in a punishing right angle with Uranus in house 3, very much to do with your interaction with others on a daily basis. How we communicate in the modern world is a lot to do with technology, which Uranus governs. So I feel that there's been a lot of tension, a lot of stress that's been washing around your situation. Now, Saturn and Uranus are technically still in a square at the start of this year, but the gap is much larger, about 7 degrees. So I think you're going to find that despite the arrival of Saturn in your sign, yes, it may ask you to become more disciplined about certain elements of your situation. You may decide to go on a health kick. You may decide to reposition your life in some kind of significant way. But I think generally this can be actually a very positive development. Now let's revisit right at the start of the year. So Venus and Jupiter are in a conjunction on the first day of 2023. Venus obviously can be about relating, but it also can be about money. But this is house 11 for you, very much about your highest hopes, friendships, future plans, networking. And so that means that there's going to be a greater weight and importance on those interactions this year. Mercury is in retrograde in that part of your situation too. So some friendships could disappoint you. Some people's lack of connection with you may be something that is a feature. But the Sun forges a brilliant angle to Uranus right at the start of this year, suggesting that actually you can sparkle with the people who really understand where you're coming from. But one relationship can take on a fated and very important virtue throughout this year. So exciting stuff indeed. Now also Jupiter, the planet of growth and optimism, and of course traditionally of good luck, is in house 2 right at the start of this year, and it's forging a pretty good link with Mars in your 4th house. Mars is retrograde, so if there has been a need to change where you live, Mars being in your 4th house for such a long period of time, through to the time when it transitions into Cancer on the 25th of March this year, I think you'll be ready for that by then, because Mars may have created some frustrations around, if you're feeling that you're living somewhere that doesn't quite work for you, or there's politics in your family or an emotional relationship. Mars may have seen you get a little steamed up a little quicker. But generally that link with Jupiter can be good. So money can be made from property this year. Of course, we're likely to see some kind of devaluation, but I feel that as long as you're realistic in your approach to finance, you can definitely make progress, because there are 2 enormously influential eclipses to help you, plus the arrival of the North Node on the 13th of July into your 2nd solar house. There's also a beautiful link between the North Node and Jupiter, which occurs on the 1st of June exactly, but from the 17th of May to the 16th of June, they're also closely allied, and that can also prove to be very fortunate for you. Now, of course, Jupiter is going to be moving this year, but having Jupiter at the start of the year in house 2 is really something to relish. But it moves on May the 16th into the same part of your situation where Uranus has been making you very, very imaginative and seeing you have lots of buzzy ideas, but perhaps making it rather difficult to sleep. Now, Jupiter is not going to meet up with Uranus this year. That will happen in 24. But I think generally Jupiter brings the potential for an improvement in your relationship with people immediately around you, or if you're someone who has very good associations immediately around you, more connection in your community is possible. Also, if you are someone who's interested in technology, Jupiter moving into the 3rd house can be very fortunate for you indeed. Now, the new moon in your sign on the 23rd of February is going to be in a disassociate way in conjunction with Saturn, which is just preparing obviously to move in March on the 7th. So a new moon gives us a chance to obviously set our intentions, and it's very much about us as the individual, combining the drive of the sun and the intuition of the moon in a combined way. But this dark moon with Saturn on it is going to make you very realistic. So what you plan for the following month, I think, you're going to have your feet very much on the ground. I don't think that's a bad thing at all. Saturn can be a very moderating influence. It can be incredibly difficult, of course, but I actually feel this is going to be so much better than how it has been over the last 2.5 years. But we do have on March the 21st a new moon just as the sun moves into the sign of Aries in house 2 for you. So it's on the start of the first cardinal quadrant, so it's on the spring equinox, and that is really, really significant. I think that's going to give you quite an uplift. And then the solar eclipse, which occurs on the 20th or 21st of April, also in Aries, but right at the end of the sign, that's combining with Jupiter before it moves into Taurus. They are squaring to Pluto, which of course is the other big mover this year. Pluto is going to move into your 12th house of deeper psychology on the 23rd of March. March is such an important month, but it only gets up to 21 minutes and it returns to the sign of Capricorn on the 11th of June. So its impact will be felt much more deeply from the beginning of January 2024. But what I would say is those two eclipses can bring a fresh approach to how you use your resources. And once the North Node reverses into Aries on the 13th of July, that process is going to strengthen even more. But on the 5th or 6th of May, depending on where you're located, there is a Scorpio full moon opposite Uranus and the Sun, which are in a conjunction. So that suggests that some surprises can still show up this year in terms of electric connections, light bulb moments in terms of enterprising ideas. The lunar eclipse on the 28th of October is in the sign of Taurus, so we have the reversal of the two axes there, and that actually forges a terrific angle with Saturn in your sign. So I think by the end of the year you'll be able to make sense more of how you're using your ideas to regulate your world, but whereas the nervous energy of the last few years has been really, really quite challenging. And remember, we do have that fixed star right at the start of this year. There is Sadalachbia, which is in your sign, and the midpoint for this year for us all is Piscean. It's 6 degrees Pisces, so that gives us all an opportunity to use the mutability, the sensitivity, the compassion of Pisces to our advantage. But this is a very fortunate fixed star, and it's in your sign as you come into this year. So absolutely glorious in that regard. Venus is also going to be making its way through the sign of Leo for 4.5 months. Now, of course, Mars was the big extended journey in 2022 into 23. This year, Venus. So from the 6th of June till the 9th of October, it's in the part of your horoscope which is to do with everyday structures and organisation and order. There could be a relationship you strike up with a colleague, someone at work, a line manager, someone like that, that actually really is very positive, or your ability to relate skillfully in a professional environment can be very good for your prospects. For some lucky fish, maybe a romance is going to strike up in a very ordinary situation. I often use this one: bus stop, waiting for a train, supermarket queue, just those random kind of places where there's suddenly a connection of energy. Venus can be very much to do with pulling things to us in an alluring way. So really very, very helpful, I have to say. The retrograde from the 23rd of July to the 3rd of September could see you a bit compromised if there's, say, a job where you really like the people and you're quite popular, but the job itself doesn't pay enough, or you don't feel quite recognised enough by the management. There could be some thinking about what you should do. But in a romantic relationship that's well established, I think what the retrograde is asking for is a fair share of the domestic load. Now, that doesn't mean to say that everybody has to match one another's tasks absolutely identically. Someone may have more of a thing for washing up, or putting the washing out, or the trash, or doing the garden. The other person might have other qualities to do with childcare or so on. So it doesn't have to be exactly matched, but there has to be a degree of respect. And I think if there's a lack of respect, the retrograde suggests that despite the charm that Venus often layers over situations, some kind of point of reality needs to be reached. But remember, Venus is on Pluto in a very fated way at the start of this year, and one friendship is going to become more. The 12th of October sees Mars in your sister water sign of Scorpio, and of course Mars rules this sign traditionally. So if you're wanting to get away for some travel, that's likely to be a fine time to do so. So Saturn moving into your sign provides opportunities. I think it can be better than what you've been going through. The stress and tension in the last couple of years is broadly slackening off. There can be an opportunity to realign your finances in a really positive way to grow your sense of self-worth. Your future direction is blessed by that solar return, but it may be that with Mercury retrograde in Earth signs 3 times this year, and finally right at the end of the year in your sector of work and responsibility, that you could just rethink some of your future hopes. But if that does happen, remember your innate flexibility and mutability is wonderful and something to really appreciate about yourself.